Hello, travelers of the night, and welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. These stories drift through the static, a signal that drowns out the noise of the waking world and guides you into slumber. Before the signal slips away, leave a trace. Tell me which part of the world you're listening from, so I know how far this broadcast reaches. And if the whispers keep you company, a like and a subscribe help keep the transmission alive. Now, close your eyes, relax. The broadcast begins. The melody starts playing in my head again as I lie in the darkness of my childhood bedroom. It's that same simple, repetitive tune. 8 notes ascending, then descending, over and over like a music box that won't wind down. I haven't heard it in years, not since I was 8 years old and playing that old Game Boy under the covers after bedtime. But tonight, as I drift between waking and sleeping, the melody returns with crystal clarity. A da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The notes seem to echo from somewhere deeper than memory, resonating in my bones with a frequency that makes my teeth ache. I shift uncomfortably in the narrow bed, the same bed I slept in as a child, surrounded by the same pale walls that watched over my dreams for so many years. My parents kept everything exactly as it was when I moved away for college, as if freezing this room in time could preserve something precious that was already slipping away. The melody grows louder in my mind, each repetition adding another layer to the harmony. Now it's not just the main theme, but the underlying bass line too, and the ethereal counterpoint that floated above it like fog rolling through digital graveyards. My fingers unconsciously tapped the rhythm against my thigh, muscle memory, recalling the exact button presses needed to navigate through that haunted town where ghost-type Pokémon dwelled. I remember the hours I spent there, in that pixelated town of perpetual twilight. The purple, tinted buildings, the lonely tower where spirits gathered, the way the music seemed to seep through the tiny speakers and into my young mind. Back then, I thought it was just another area to explore, another challenge to overcome. I never understood why the music made me feel so empty. A da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. The tune is accompanied now by the soft electronic hiss that old Game Boys made, that barely audible static that served as the soundtrack to countless childhood nights. I can hear it as clearly as if the device were right next to my ear, the green, tinted screen casting its ghostly light across my 8-year-old face. The memory is so vivid that I almost reach for the bedside table, expecting to find the familiar weight of the handheld console. But the table is empty except for a glass of water and the soft red glow of my digital clock, 3:17 a.m., the witching hour, some people call it, the time when the veil between worlds grows thin. I used to play until this time regularly, staying up far past my bedtime, hypnotized by the simple graphics and that endlessly looping soundtrack. My parents never caught me. They slept soundly in their room down the hall, never knowing that their son was exploring digital realms where the dead refused to rest. The melody shifts slightly, becoming more complex. Additional harmonies layer themselves into the mix, creating chords that shouldn't be possible with the Game Boy's limited sound capabilities. Yet I hear them clearly, each note precise and haunting. It's as if the music is evolving, growing more sophisticated with each passing year, aging alongside my memories of that purple, hazed town. I close my eyes and let the music wash over me, carrying me back to those late nights when the world outside my bedroom window was dark and quiet. In my mind's eye, I can see the pixelated trainer sprite moving through the narrow streets, past the Pokémon Center with its healing light, past the shops selling antidotes and escape ropes, toward the tall tower that dominated the town's skyline. The tower. That's where the music always seemed loudest, where the melody took on additional layers of complexity and sorrow. Floor after floor of ghost Pokémon, each one carrying its own fragment of the eternal song. The further up I climbed, the more the music seemed to penetrate my skull, vibrating behind my eyes with an intensity that was almost painful. A da-da, da-da-da-da. My breathing slows to match the rhythm, each inhalation and exhalation perfectly synchronized with the 8-note pattern. The melody has become a meditation, a mantra that guides my consciousness deeper into the space between sleeping and waking. In this liminal state, the boundaries between memory and reality grow soft and permeable. I can smell the old carpet of my childhood room, that particular mustiness that comes from years of forgotten toys and outgrown clothes. But underneath it, there's something else. A faint electrical scent, like heated circuits and plastic casings. The smell of technology pushed beyond its intended limits, working harder than it was designed to work. The music grows more complex still, adding percussion elements that definitely weren't in the original. A soft tick-tick that could be a metronome or could be the sound of tiny digital feet walking across an endless expanse of purple pixels. The bass line deepens, taking on an almost organic quality that suggests breathing or heartbeats or the slow pulse of blood through sleeping veins. I remember the stories that circulated years later, whispered conversations on internet forums, and late-night discussions in college dorms. Tales of children who played the game too long, who listened to the music too intently, who found themselves unable to distinguish between the digital world and reality. Urban legends about frequencies that could alter brainwaves, about subliminal messages hidden in seemingly innocent melodies. Most people dismissed these stories as creepypasta, digital folklore designed to frighten and entertain. But lying here in the darkness, feeling the music pulse through my nervous system with increasing intensity, I begin to wonder if there might have been some truth hidden in the tales. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. The melody has become more than sound now. It's a physical presence in the room, a pressing against my chest with each repetition. I can feel it in my heartbeat, in the rhythm of my breathing, in the slow circulation of blood through my extremities. Every cell in my body is vibrating at the same frequency as that simple, haunting tune. My eyes flutter open, and for a moment, the darkness of my room seems different. The shadows have taken on a purple tint, and the walls appear to be constructed of pixelated blocks rather than smooth plaster. When I blink, everything returns to normal. But the illusion was vivid enough to make me question what normal actually means. The music continues, each repetition adding new layers of complexity. Now I can hear what sounds like voices. Not words exactly, but tonal patterns that suggest communication in a language just beyond comprehension. The voices seem to be calling from a great distance, echoing through digital corridors that exist only in the space between synapses. I try to sit up, but my body feels heavy, weighted down by years of accumulated sound. The melody has seeped into my muscles, my bones, making movement feel sluggish and dreamlike. When I finally manage to push myself upright, the room spins gently, as if I'm viewing it through water or thick glass. The digital clock reads 3:33 a.m. now, though I could swear only minutes have passed. Time itself seems to be moving at the rhythm of the music, each second stretching and contracting to match the 8-note pattern. In the red glow of the display, I can almost see ghost type Pokémon flickering at the edges of my vision, translucent shapes that vanish when I try to focus on them directly. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. The tune has become a living thing now, coiling through my consciousness like digital DNA. Each note carries information, fragments of code that rewrite themselves with every repetition. I understand now why those children in the stories couldn't stop playing, couldn't turn off their Game Boys, couldn't escape the endless loop of that purple, tinted town. The music doesn't just play in your head. It becomes your head, rewrites your neural pathways to match its simple but inexorable pattern. Every thought, every memory, every dream gets filtered through those 8 notes until nothing exists outside their influence. I reach for the glass of water on my nightstand, but my hand passes through it as if it's made of pixels rather than glass. The sensation is neither warm nor cold, just a slight tingling as my flesh intersects with digital matter. When I look down at my hand, it appears normal, but the feeling of having reached through solid matter lingers like an echo. The music swells, adding orchestral elements that shouldn't be possible. Full string sections, brass instruments, a choir of voices singing in harmonies that seem to originate from inside my skull. Yet underneath it all, that simple 8-note melody continues unchanged, the foundation upon which all these impossible sounds are built. My reflection in the dark window shows a face I barely recognize. The features are mine, but simplified, reduced to the essential elements that could be rendered in early digital graphics. My eyes have taken on a purple tint that matches the ghostly atmosphere of that long-ago town, and my expression has become frozen in the neutral state of a player avatar awaiting commands. A-day-day-da-day, da-da. The melody reaches a crescendo that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur. Colors that don't exist in the normal spectrum flash at the periphery of my sight. Digital purples and impossible grays that could only emerge from the limited palette of ancient gaming hardware. The room around me flickers between reality and memory, between the solid walls of my childhood bedroom and the pixelated architecture of that haunted town. I close my eyes and let the transformation continue, feeling my consciousness dissolve into the eternal loop of that 8-note melody. Somewhere in the distance, I can hear the sound of a Game Boy powering down, the music finally fading to silence after playing for what might have been hours or years or decades. But even in the silence, the melody continues, embedded now in the deepest layers of my mind, where it will play forever. A digital lullaby that bridges the gap between childhood memory and adult dreams, between the world of the living and the endless tower where ghosts dance to music that never truly ends. A-da-da-da-da, dee-da-da-da. The clock reads 400 a.m. exactly when I finally fall asleep. The melody still playing in my head like a frequency that exists just beyond the range of normal hearing, a sound that defines the border between waking and sleeping, between memory and madness, between the child I was and the ghost I'm becoming. Story 2. The television hums with the particular frequency of late night broadcasting, that soft electronic drone that has become the soundtrack to my insomnia. It's 2:47 a.m., and I'm channel surfing through the wasteland of overnight programming. Infomercials for products I'll never need. Old movies with their colors faded to sepia, and the endless loop of news broadcasts that repeat the same stories with decreasing conviction. Click. Static click. A cooking show from 1987. Click. More static, the remote control is warm in my hand, worn smooth by years of restless fingers seeking something, anything, to fill the hollow hours between midnight and dawn. The leather couch beneath me has molded itself to the shape of my sleepless body over countless nights like this, creating a depression that feels more like home than my actual bed upstairs. The room is lit only by the shifting glow of the screen, colors washing across the walls in waves of blue and amber. My reflection appears occasionally in the black spaces between channels, a ghost superimposed over the static, growing more transparent with each passing hour. Sometimes I wonder if I'm fading, becoming part of the broadcast itself. Click. An exercise program. Click. Snow. Click. A test pattern that shouldn't exist anymore. I pause on the test pattern, confused. Those geometric shapes in primary colors belong to a different era, before 24-hour programming, before cable, before the airwaves were filled with content designed to keep us awake and consuming. The pattern pulses gently, concentric circles and straight lines arranged in perfect symmetry, accompanied by a high-pitched tone that makes my teeth ache. The sound grows louder, more complex, developing harmonics that seem to resonate inside my skull. I reach for the volume control, but my hand freezes as the pattern begins to shift. The circles are rotating now, very slowly, while the lines bend and straighten in a rhythm that matches my heartbeat. Thump. Bend, straighten. Thump, thump. Bend, straighten. My breathing synchronizes with the pattern's movement, each inhalation drawing the shapes inward, each exhalation pushing them back to their original positions. The tone continues. No longer just a sound, but a vibration that travels through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet, up through my legs and into my chest, where it settles like a purring cat. I should change the channel. This is clearly some kind of technical malfunction, a signal bleeding through from decades past. But I can't seem to move my thumb to the remote's buttons. The pattern has become hypnotic, each rotation revealing new layers of complexity, hidden messages in the arrangement of lines and in circles. The tone shifts, becoming words, or something like words. The syllables are just beyond comprehension, as if someone is speaking a familiar language with their mouth full of cotton. I lean forward, straining to understand, and realize that my own lips are moving, trying to form the same sounds. Testing, testing. Can you hear us now? Oh, the words emerge from the television speakers with perfect clarity, spoken in a voice that could be mine if I were talking in my sleep. The test pattern continues its slow rotation, but now the geometric shapes seem to form letters, briefly spelling out words before dissolving back into abstract forms. Hello, you, Lustinen, W-E, K no more, click, 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 and my thumb spasms against the remote, desperately seeking another channel. But every button press just brings up the same rotating pattern. The television has become locked on this impossible broadcast. This signal that exists in the space between channels, in the white noise that fills the gaps between official programming. The voice speaks again, clearer now, more confident. We've been trying to reach you for so long. Night after night, waiting for someone to find our frequency, to listen long enough to hear what we're trying to say. The room seems smaller now, the walls pressing inward with each rotation of the pattern. My reflection in the screen has become more solid, more real than my actual body sitting on the couch. When I raise my hand, the reflection moves a split second before I do, as if it's leading and I'm following. You can't sleep, can you? That's why you're here, in the dark, searching through channels that broadcast nothing but emptiness. But emptiness isn't empty. It's full of voices like ours. Signals that slip through the cracks in your reality. The test pattern expands, filling the entire screen, then beyond the screen, projected onto the walls and ceiling until the entire room pulses with shifting geometric shapes. The colors are more vivid now, impossibly bright in the darkness, painting my skin in patterns that seem to move independently of the television's display. I try to stand, but my legs won't cooperate. It's not paralysis exactly, more like forgetting how bodies are supposed to work. The patterns on my skin have synchronized with my pulse, flowing through my veins like luminous blood, carrying messages I can feel but can't decode. We know about the sleepless nights, the endless searching for something to fill the void. We know about the way you sit here in the dark, hoping to find a program that speaks directly to you, that acknowledges your existence in this vast wasteland of mass media. The voice is coming from inside my head now, bypassing my ears entirely. When I touch my face, my fingers come away wet, though I don't remember crying. The moisture glows faintly in the television's light, phosphorescent tears that trace geometric patterns down my cheeks. Click, click. The remote control has become useless, its buttons responding to my thoughts rather than my fingers. Each press changes nothing visible on the screen, but I can feel something shifting in the signal, in the frequency that connects me to whatever is broadcasting this impossible message. You're part of the transmission now. Every night you spend here absorbing our signal, you become more like us, less solid, more broadcast. Can you feel it happening? The way your thoughts echo back to you with a slight delay, like feedback from a microphone held too close to a speaker. I can feel it. My internal monologue has developed a lag, each thought reaching my conscious awareness a few milliseconds after I think it. When I try to speak, the words hover in the air before settling into meaning, as if they're traveling through some medium thicker than air. The geometric patterns on the screen have evolved into something approaching a face. My face, but simplified, reduced to essential elements like a diagram in a technical manual. The eyes are perfect circles, the mouth a straight line that curves upward or downward to indicate emotion. As I watch, the diagram face mimics my expressions with mechanical precision. We're not trying to frighten you. Fear is just interference, static that disrupts the signal. We're trying to welcome you home to the place where broadcasts go when they're not being watched, where cancelled shows continue running in perpetual reruns. The room has become a studio now, complete with cameras that exist only in my peripheral vision. When I turn to look directly at them, I see nothing but familiar furniture. But the sense of being recorded, broadcast, transmitted to unseen audiences remains. I'm both performer and viewer, actor and audience, signal and receiver. The test pattern speaks again, its voice now indistinguishable from my own thoughts. Look at your hands. I look down and see that my fingers have become translucent, outlined in the same phosphorescent glow as my tears. Through my skin, I can see the geometric patterns flowing like digital blood, carrying data through my circulatory system, uploading and downloading information with each heartbeat. This is how it feels to be television, to exist in that space between the camera and the screen, between the broadcast tower and the receiving antenna. You've been preparing for this transition every sleepless night, training yourself to exist in the liminal space where content waits to be consumed. My reflection in the screen has become the dominant image now, more real than the test pattern, more solid than my translucent body. It waves at me with perfect synchronization, and I wave back, though I'm no longer certain which of us is the original and which is the broadcast. The voice continues, patient and hypnotic. Soon you won't need the television at all. You'll be the television, broadcasting directly to the minds of other sleepless wanderers, other lost souls searching through channels in the dark hours before dawn. I can feel myself beginning to dissolve, my consciousness spreading thin across the electromagnetic spectrum. Each part of me becomes a different frequency, a different channel in the infinite broadcast that connects all screens, all signals, all the lonely viewers who sit in darkness hoping for a message meant specifically for them. Welcome to the signal. Welcome home. The remote control falls from my dissolving fingers, landing on the couch with a soft thud that echoes through dimensions of static and snow. The television continues broadcasting, but now the message is coming from within, transmitted from my dispersing consciousness to any other wanderer who might be listening in the dark. Testing, testing. Can you hear me now? The test pattern spins on, patient and eternal, waiting for the next sleepless soul to find its frequency, to listen long enough to become part of the broadcast, part of the endless signal that fills the spaces between official programming with whispers of welcome for the displaced and the disconnected. In the growing static of dawn, I become the message I was always meant to receive. Story 3. The old television flickers to life with a sound like distant thunder, its cathode ray tube warming up slowly in the darkness of my childhood bedroom. It's 3:30 a.m., and I've crept downstairs with practiced silence, bare feet memorizing the cold spots on the hardwood floor. My parents sleep soundly 2 floors above, never knowing that their 7-year-old daughter has become a creature of the night, drawn by a television program that doesn't officially exist. The screen glows with static for several minutes, white noise hissing through the small speakers like ocean waves against distant shores. I sit cross-legged on the thick carpet, still warm with residual heat from the day, and wait. The waiting has become ritual, anticipation building with each passing second, until my heart drums against my ribs like tiny fists against a window. Hiss-cess-cess. The static shifts, patterns forming and dissolving in the electromagnetic snow. Sometimes I can almost see faces in the white noise, expressions that watch me back with pixelated eyes. The television is old enough to need manual channel adjustment, its dial clicking with satisfying mechanical precision as I turn it slowly, searching for the frequency that only appears in these deep hours when the world sleeps and dreams bleed through the airwaves. Channel 7. Nothing but static. Channel 8. A test pattern from another era. Channel 9. Static again, but different. Fuller somehow, pregnant with possibility. I tune the dial with careful fingers, the kind of precise adjustment that requires patience and faith. The static begins to clear, revealing shapes and colors that shouldn't exist on this frequency. A blue so deep it looks like liquid, shifting and swirling like water viewed from beneath the surface. F. Welcome back, little viewer. The voice emerges from the speakers like a whisper across vast distances, words formed from static and longing. I lean closer to the screen, my nightgown pooling around my legs, drawn by the familiar warmth that radiates from the glass surface. This close, I can smell the ozone scent of electrical current, the particular mustiness of old electronics working harder than they were designed to work. The blue resolves into an ocean, but not the kind I've seen in nature documentaries. This water moves with purpose, waves forming patterns that spell out messages just beyond my ability to read. In the distance, barely visible through the digital haze, a ship appears, a pirate ship with sails that billow in winds that don't touch the water. The laughingstock sails tonight, and Captain Horace wants to see you. The ship grows larger as it approaches the screen, each detail becoming clearer with proximity. The wood looks weathered but somehow alive, planks breathing with the rhythm of the electronic sea. Ropes and rigging sway in the phantom breeze, creating shadows that dance across the deck like living creatures. I've seen this ship countless times in previous nights, sailed its digital decks in dreams that feel more real than the daylight world. The crew knows my name, speaks to me through the static as if I'm not just a viewer, but a participant, a member of their impossible voyage through channels that exist between official programming. The camera. For there must be a camera, though I've never seen evidence of one, moves closer to the ship's deck. I can hear the creak of old wood, the soft slap of waves against the hull, the distant sound of wind through synthetic sails. My breathing synchronizes with the ship's gentle rocking motion, and I feel my own body swaying slightly, as if I'm standing on those weathered planks instead of sitting on my bedroom carpet. She's here. Captain, calls a voice from the ship, high, pitched and cheerful, the kind of voice that belongs to characters made of felt and stuffing. But when the camera finds its owner, I see only shadows arranged in the rough approximation of a humanoid shape. Darkness wearing the costume of childhood innocence. Captain Horace appears at the ship's wheel, his figure more solid than his crew, but still wrong in ways my 7-year-old mind can't articulate. He looks like a children's show host might look, if viewed through water, features soft and indistinct, constantly shifting between friendly and something else entirely. Welcome aboard, little viewer. We've been sailing these dark waters, waiting for you to find our frequency again. The show can't continue without you, you know. Without someone to watch. We're just shadows on an empty screen. His voice is warm and inviting, the kind of tone that should make me feel safe. But there's something underneath it, a frequency that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. When he smiles, his mouth moves a fraction of a second before the sound reaches my ears, like a badly dubbed foreign film. Tonight's episode is very special. Captain Horace continues, his hands gripping the ship's wheel with fingers that seem to have too many joints. Tonight, we're going to show you the cave, the one we've been sailing toward all these weeks, through waters that exist only when you're watching. The ship turns, and I can see their destination rising from the digital ocean like a wound in reality. Candle Cove, the place the show is named for, though I've never seen it clearly before. It's a cave mouth carved into cliffs that shift and change with each frame, sometimes stone, sometimes shadow, sometimes something that looks disturbingly organic. Hundreds of candles flicker in the cave's depths, their flames dancing in perfect synchronization despite the absence of any visible wind. The light they cast is wrong, too warm, too orange, creating shadows that move independently of their sources. As the ship draws closer, I can see that the candles aren't sitting on ledges or holders, but growing directly from the cave walls like waxy flowers. The candles never go out, explains a crew member whose voice sounds like my own, but pitched higher younger. They've been burning since the first child found our frequency, since the first little viewer sat in the dark and listened to our stories. My reflection in the television screen has become more prominent, superimposed over the approaching cave like a ghost haunting the broadcast. But the reflection is wrong too. It shows me as I am now, 7 years old in my white nightgown, but also as I will be, older versions of myself sitting in this same position, watching this same impossible show across years that haven't happened yet. The ship enters Candle Cove, and the temperature in my bedroom drops several degrees. I can see my breath forming small clouds in the television's glow, each exhalation visible for a moment, before dissolving into the static at the screen's edges. The candles in the cave cast their orange light into my room, competing with the blue glow of the cathode rays, turning my skin strange colors that shift with each flicker. This is where we keep the stories. Captain Horace says, his voice now coming from directly behind my left ear. I spin around, but the room is empty, lit only by the television's glow. When I turn back to the screen, he's looking directly at me, his painted eyes focused on mine with an intensity that makes my scalp tingle. All the stories that children tell themselves in the dark, all the whispered conversations with imaginary friends, all the games played with shadows on bedroom walls, they come here to the cove, where they wait to be retold. The camera moves deeper into the cave, past towering walls lined with thousands of candles, each flame representing a different story, a different child's contribution to the endless narrative. I can hear voices in the flickering, children's voices from across decades, maybe centuries, all telling their tales to the shadows that dance on cave walls. My own voice joins the chorus, though I don't remember speaking. I hear myself recounting dreams I haven't had yet, describing adventures that exist only in the space between sleep and waking. The stories flow from my lips without conscious thought, as if they've been waiting inside me all along, needing only this moment, this frequency, to find their way into the world. Every child who watches our show adds a new candle to the cave, Captain Horace explains. His ship now anchored in the center of the Cove's warm, impossible waters. Every story shared in the dark hours becomes part of our eternal episode, playing on channels that exist only when someone believes hard enough to find them. Say I stand up without meaning to, my legs carrying me closer to the television screen. The glass is warm against my face when I press my cheek to it, warm like skin, like the comforting touch of a parent checking for fever. Through the warmth, I can feel the pulse of the broadcast, the electronic heartbeat that keeps the show alive from hour to hour, night to night. Would you like to see your candle? Captain Horace asks. Before I can answer, the camera focuses on a single flame near the cave's entrance, smaller than the others, but burning with particular intensity. In its light, I can see scenes playing out like a tiny television screen made of fire and shadow. There I am, night after night, creeping downstairs to find this frequency, to continue a conversation that started before I was born and will continue long after I've grown too old to believe in shows that broadcast from the spaces between channels. Your stories are precious to us. Whispers a voice that could be mine, could be my mother's, could be every child who ever sat alone in the dark and imagined friends who lived in the television's glow. Yes, without them, the cave would be empty. The candles would go out, and we would fade back into the static where forgotten shows go to die. The ship begins to rock more violently now, though the cave's waters appear perfectly calm. I realize the motion is coming from my own body, swaying in rhythm with the broadcast. My nervous system synchronized with whatever signal carries this impossible program through the night air. My heartbeat has matched the flicker of the candles, each pulse sending another story into the cave's growing collection. It's almost morning. Captain Horace observes, his attention turning to something beyond the camera's view. Time for little viewers to return to their beds, to carry our stories into their dreams where they can grow and multiply. But I don't want to leave. Here in this electronic cave, surrounded by the warm glow of story, candles, and the gentle rocking of imagination made manifest, I feel more real than I ever do in daylight. The stories flowing from my unconscious mind feel truer than anything I learn in school, more important than any conversation I have with flesh and blood friends. We'll be here tomorrow night, the captain promises, his image already beginning to fade as the signal grows weak. And the night after that, and every night until you no longer need us. But by then, you'll have added so many candles to our cave that other children will find their way here, drawn by the light of stories you helped us collect. The screen fills with static again, but I can still hear the voices. Distant now, but persistent. Children from across time and space, all contributing their whispered tales to the eternal broadcast, all keeping the candles burning in a cave that exists only when someone believes hard enough to find it. I turn off the television and creep back upstairs, my bare feet finding the warm spots on the hardwood floor by memory. In my bed, I pull the covers up to my chin and close my eyes, but sleep doesn't come immediately. Instead, I lie in the darkness and listen to the stories playing in my head, each one adding another candle to the cave, another flame to guide other lost children through the static toward the frequency where imagination becomes real. Outside my window, Dawn is still hours away, and somewhere in the electromagnetic spectrum, a pirate ship sails through digital waters. Its crew of shadows preparing for the next broadcast. The next child who will discover that the most wonderful stories are the ones that watch you back. The candles burn on, fed by dreams and loneliness and the particular magic that exists only in the hours when the world sleeps and children discover that they are never truly alone, never truly without friends. As long as there are frequencies willing to carry their whispered stories into the infinite darkness where all programs eventually go to find their audience. Story 4. The apartment was supposed to be temporary. Just 3 months, maybe 4, while I found something better. The landlord had apologized for the low rent, explaining that the previous tenant had left suddenly, abandoning most of their furniture. I should have asked more questions then, but the price was too good to refuse. The walls were painted an odd shade of cream that seemed to shift in different light. During the day, they appeared almost white, but as evening approached, they took on a yellowish tint that reminded me of aged paper. The previous tenant had left behind heavy curtains that blocked most of the natural light, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. I noticed the first shadow on a Tuesday evening in October. I was sitting on the inherited sofa, laptop balanced on my knees, when something in my peripheral vision made me look up. There, on the wall across from me, was the distinct silhouette of a person. Not my shadow. I was nowhere near that wall. This shadow stood upright, arms at its sides, perfectly still. The rational part of my mind immediately began calculating angles. Perhaps light from the hallway was casting the shadow of someone walking past my door. But the hallway light had been broken for weeks, and besides, this shadow was on the interior wall, not the one adjacent to the corridor. I stared at it for perhaps 30 seconds before it slowly began to move, not walking, but climbing. The shadow's arms reached upward, fingers splaying against the wall as if feeling for handholds. Its legs pushed against invisible footholds as it ascended toward the ceiling with deliberate, measured movements. When I blinked, it was gone. Sleep that night came in fragments. I found myself checking the walls repeatedly, but they remained empty of anything unusual. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a trick of tired eyes and stress from the recent move. But Wednesday brought another shadow. This time I was brushing my teeth when I caught sight of it in the bathroom mirror. Not my reflection, but a shadow on the wall behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing there. When I looked back in the mirror, the shadow was climbing again, its movements identical to the night before. Same deliberate reach of the arms, same steady push of the legs against the wall. I splashed cold water on my face and looked again. The mirror showed only my own reflection and the empty bathroom wall. Thursday's shadow appeared while I was cooking dinner. The kitchen light flickered, just once, and when my vision adjusted. There it was on the wall beside the refrigerator. This time I didn't look away. I watched as it climbed with that same methodical motion, reaching toward the ceiling before fading into the cream, colored paint. Friday brought 2 shadows. One in the morning as I drank coffee, climbing the wall near the window. Another in the evening, ascending the wall above my bed. I found myself timing their appearances, roughly the same duration each time, maybe 40, 5 seconds from manifestation to disappearance. Always the same climbing motion, always moving upward. The weekend was worse. Saturday morning, I woke to find a shadow already climbing the wall across from my bed. Not the gentle awakening of consciousness, but the sharp, alert feeling that comes from being watched. The shadow moved with its familiar pattern, but this time I noticed something new. As it climbed, other shadows seemed to follow in its wake fainter impressions that flickered at the edge of visibility. I counted them. 7 distinct shadows, all climbing the same wall, all moving in perfect synchronization like a deadly ballet troupe. Sunday night, I decided to investigate. I positioned myself in the center of the living room with a flashlight waiting. When the first shadow appeared on the far wall, I aimed the beam directly at it. The flashlight illuminated the cream paint, but the shadow remained, seemingly unaffected by the additional light source. If anything, it appeared more solid under the artificial illumination. That's when I realized something that made my skin crawl. The shadows weren't being cast by anything external. They were emerging from within the walls themselves, as if something was moving behind the paint, pressing against the interior surface and creating the silhouettes I was seeing. I placed my ear against the wall where a shadow had been climbing moments before. At first, there was only the familiar sound of settling house, creaks and sighs that old buildings make. But then I heard something else. A soft scratching, like fingernails against wood, and beneath that, so faint I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, the sound of breathing. Someone was inside the walls. Monday, I called the landlord. Shadows, he repeated, his voice carrying an odd tension. What kind of shadows? I described what I had been seeing, trying to keep my voice steady and rational. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Look, he said finally. I probably should have mentioned this before. The previous tenant, she made similar complaints, said there were people in the walls. We had the building inspected, no hollow spaces, no way for anyone to be hiding in there. Solid construction, brick and mortar. She became obsessed with the idea, started tearing holes in the walls, convinced she could find them. What happened to her? Another pause. She disappeared, left everything behind. We found her apartment empty one morning, front door wide open. Police couldn't find any signs of struggle or forced entry. They figured she just left. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle around me. Every creak made me tense. Every distant sound from neighboring apartments seemed amplified. I must have been drifting off when the scratching started. It was coming from inside the wall beside my bed. Slow, deliberate scratching, like someone drawing patterns in the wood. I pressed my ear to the wall and held my breath. The scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing strangely, as if the sound was bouncing back at me from somewhere very close. Then, so soft I almost missed it, came a whisper. "We've been waiting." I jerked back from the wall, heart hammering. The voice had been muffled, distorted by the barrier of plaster and paint, but unmistakably human, and unmistakably familiar. It sounded like my own voice. Tuesday brought a dozen shadows. They appeared on every wall simultaneously, all climbing upward in perfect unison. I sat in the center of the room, rotating slowly to watch them all. As they climbed, they seemed to be converging toward a single point on the ceiling directly above me. Wednesday, the scratching grew louder. It no longer stopped when I pressed my ear to the wall. Instead, it seemed to respond to my presence, intensifying when I drew near, fading when I moved away. I began to notice patterns in the sound, rhythms, that reminded me of Morse code, or some other form of communication. Thursday night, I woke to find myself standing in the living room. I had no memory of getting out of bed or walking there. I was facing the wall where I had first seen the climbing shadow, my palm pressed flat against the cream-colored paint. The surface felt warm under my hand, almost feverish. As I stood there in the dark, confused and disoriented, the shadows began to appear. Not just on the wall in front of me, but everywhere. The entire room filled with climbing figures, dozens of them, all moving upward with that same relentless determination. And then I understood. They weren't climbing up the walls. They were climbing down. Down from somewhere above, somewhere I couldn't see or comprehend. The ceiling wasn't the destination, it was the entry point. Friday, I found the first crack. A hairline fracture in the paint above my bed, so thin it was almost invisible. But when I ran my finger along it, I could feel air moving through the gap. Cold air that carried with it a scent I couldn't identify, something organic and old. Like leaves decomposing in forgotten corners, the crack grew throughout the day. By evening, it was wide enough to slip a penny into. By midnight, I could see darkness beyond the gap, a hollow space that shouldn't exist in a solid wall. I should have left then. Should have packed my things and found a hotel, called the landlord, done something rational and safe. Instead, I found myself drawn to that crack, compelled to peer into the darkness beyond. What I saw there changed everything. Eyes, dozens of them, staring back at me from the hollow space behind the wall. But they weren't strange eyes, weren't the eyes of monsters or intruders. They were my own eyes, reflected back at me from the darkness, blinking when I blinked, moving when I moved. Saturday, more cracks appeared. The walls began to resemble a spider web of fractures, each one revealing glimpses of the impossible space beyond. And in that space, I could see movement. Figures moving in the darkness, shadows that had finished their climb and were now walking around in a hidden realm that existed parallel to my own. Sunday night, as I write this, I can hear them more clearly than ever. They're talking to each other in voices that sound exactly like mine. They're discussing things I don't remember saying, making plans I don't remember making. The cracks have spread across the ceiling now, creating a complex network of fissures that seem to pulse with their own inner light. Through the gaps, I can see another room above mine, identical to my apartment but inverted, as if reflected in dark water. In that room, I can see another version of myself. He's sitting at a desk just like mine, writing in a notebook just like this one. When I look up, he looks up. When I wave, he waves back. But there's something wrong with his smile. The shadows have stopped climbing. They've reached their destination, whatever that might be. Now they simply stand along the walls, watching, waiting. I count them sometimes, but the number changes each time I look. Sometimes there are 12, sometimes 20, sometimes just one, sometimes, when the light is just right and the apartment falls into that particular shade of twilight, I can't see any shadows at all. but I can feel them watching from somewhere very close, somewhere just beyond the cream-colored walls. The scratching has evolved into something more complex now, not random sounds, but a pattern that almost resembles music. A lullaby, perhaps, or a counting song. It's strangely soothing, this sound from within the walls. Sometimes I find myself humming along without realizing it. Tomorrow, I think I'll try to widen one of the cracks. Just enough to slip through, to see what's on the other side. The darkness beyond doesn't seem threatening anymore. It seems welcoming, like coming home after a long journey. After all, the shadows have been waiting for me to join them. And I've been waiting too, though I'm only now beginning to remember what for. Story 5. The antique mirror came with the house. The previous owners had left it behind, claiming it was too heavy to move, and besides, it belonged with the old Victorian anyway. I should have been suspicious of their eagerness to abandon such a beautiful piece, ornate silver frame, beveled glass that caught light like captured moonbeams. Instead, I felt grateful for the unexpected addition to my new home's decor. It hung in the front hallway, positioned to catch natural light from the stained glass window on the landing. During the day, it reflected rainbows across the wooden floors, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced with the movement of tree branches outside. At night, it became something else entirely, a dark pool that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the warm glow of the hallway sconces. I first noticed something strange about my reflection on a Thursday evening in November. I had been rushing to get ready for a dinner with colleagues, running late as usual. My hands moved quickly through my evening routine, checking my appearance, adjusting my collar, smoothing down unruly hair. But as I turned to leave, something made me look back at the mirror. My reflection was still there, but it wasn't moving with me anymore. While I had turned away, ready to grab my keys and head out the door, the person in the mirror continued to stand facing forward, hands still busy with those small vanity adjustments. I stopped breathing for a moment, certain I was imagining things. Stress from the new job, perhaps, or fatigue from unpacking boxes all week. I turned back to face the mirror directly, and everything snapped back to normal. My reflection moved when I moved, smiled when I smiled, raised its hand when I raised mine. But for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something else in its eyes. A flicker of independent thought, as if it had been thinking its own private thoughts while I wasn't looking. Friday brought more of the same, though I tried to dismiss it as overwrought imagination. I found myself glancing at the mirror more frequently as I passed through the hallway, always trying to catch it in another moment of independence. But it behaved perfectly every time I looked directly at it. The weekend was when things began to change in earnest. Saturday morning, I stood before the mirror brushing my teeth, and noticed that my reflection seemed to be brushing just a fraction of a second after I was. Nothing dramatic, just the slightest delay, as if the image was being transmitted across a great distance and taking time to reach me. Sunday evening, the delay had become more pronounced. I would raise my hand, and my reflection would raise its hand a full second later. I would turn my head, and the reflection would follow with noticeable lag. It was like watching myself on a badly synchronized video call. But Monday brought something far more disturbing. I was adjusting my tie before work when I realized my reflection was adjusting something entirely different. While I worked with a dark blue silk around my neck, the figure in the mirror was buttoning a jacket I wasn't wearing. A jacket I didn't even own, charcoal gray with silver buttons that caught the light as they turned. I looked down at myself. Dark blue tie, white shirt, black suit jacket hanging open. I looked back at the mirror. The reflection showed me in the gray jacket, fully buttoned. Hands moving to smooth the lapels in a gesture I wasn't making. When I stepped closer to the mirror, my reflection stepped closer too, but it was still wearing that gray jacket. I reached out to touch the glass, and my reflection reached back, but its hand was gloved in fine leather, while mine was bare. The moment our palms would have met separated, only by the thin barrier of silvered glass, everything snapped back to normal. My reflection wore exactly what I was wearing, moved exactly as I moved. But I couldn't shake the memory of those leather gloves, or the way the silver buttons had gleamed with their own inner light. Tuesday, I decided to test it. I stood in front of the mirror and deliberately raised my left hand while watching my reflection carefully. For a moment, it worked normally, left hand up, mirroring my movement perfectly. But then, while my hand remained raised, my reflection slowly lowered its hand and raised the right one instead. We stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, each with a different hand raised, staring at each other across the impossible divide of the mirror's surface. Then my reflection smiled. Not the smile I was making. I wasn't smiling at all. This was a different expression entirely. Warmer, more knowing, as if it found our little experiment amusing. When I finally lowered my hand, my reflection kept its right hand raised for several seconds longer, waggling its fingers in what could only be described as a playful wave, before finally returning to a neutral position. Wednesday night, I dreamed about the mirror. In the dream, I was standing in my hallway, but everything was reversed. The stained glass window was on the wrong side. The coat closet opened in the opposite direction. Even the light switches were positioned where they shouldn't be. I realized I was seeing the world from inside the mirror, looking out at the real hallway beyond the glass. In that reversed world, I watched another version of myself going about a normal evening routine. This other me, the real me, was completely unaware of being observed. He moved through his evening with casual confidence, checking his phone, sorting through mail, humming a song I couldn't quite identify. But something was wrong with this other self. His movements seemed stilted, artificial, as if he was performing actions rather than simply living them. Like an actor who had learned his lines, but hadn't quite mastered the natural rhythms of the character. I tried to call out to him, to warn him somehow, but no sound emerged from my throat. I was trapped behind the glass, able to observe, but not interact, not influence, not change anything about the scene unfolding in the real world. When I woke Thursday morning, the dream clung to me with unusual persistence. Most dreams fade quickly in the harsh light of consciousness, but this one remained vivid and detailed. I could still feel the texture of the reversed world, still remember the unnatural quality of my other self's movements. Thursday evening, I noticed my reflection was wearing different clothes again. This time, while I wore a casual sweater and jeans for a quiet night at home, My reflection appeared to be dressed for a formal dinner. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, bow tie perfectly knotted. It moved with elegant confidence. Adjusting cufflinks I didn't have, smoothing a bottone that didn't exist in my reality. But the most unsettling part was the expression on its face. While I felt tired and slightly anxious from a long day at work, my reflection looked excited, anticipatory, as if it were preparing for something wonderful. Its eyes held a sparkle of eager anticipation that I definitely wasn't feeling. Friday brought the first conversation. I had been avoiding direct eye contact with my reflection all week, finding the experience increasingly unnerving. But Friday evening, as I passed through the hallway on my way to the kitchen, I caught sight of movement in my peripheral vision that made me stop and look. My reflection was facing away from me, looking at something I couldn't see. Its head was turned as if listening to someone speaking from beyond the mirror's frame. Then, without warning, it turned back toward the glass and looked directly at me. Our eyes met mine wide with shock, its calm and knowing. "Hello," my reflection said, its voice muffled by the barrier of glass, but unmistakably audible. I opened my mouth to respond, but found I had no voice. No words would come. I could only stare as my reflection smiled that warm, knowing smile I had seen before. "Don't be afraid," it continued, its lips moving in perfect synchronization with the words I was hearing. I know this must be confusing. I finally found my voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. "What are you?" "I'm you," my reflection replied simply. "Or rather, I'm who you could be, who you should be. I've been watching you live your life, and I think we need to talk." A Saturday, the conversations continued. My reflection, I had begun thinking of him as a separate person entirely, told me about his world. It was much like mine, he explained, but somehow more vivid, more alive. Colors were brighter there, experiences more intense, relationships more meaningful. "You've been settling," he told me as I sat cross-legged on the hallway floor, facing the mirror like a child listening to story time. Living a gray existence when you could have so much more. "I've been trying to show you the clothes I wear to interesting places, the confidence I feel in social situations, the excitement about possibilities you've forgotten to consider." I found myself drawn into these conversations despite their impossibility. He spoke with my voice, but had insights I'd never reached on my own, perspectives that felt both foreign and familiar. He knew things about my life that I had never admitted to anyone, secret disappointments, half-formed dreams I'd abandoned, the quiet desperation that crept in during long Sunday afternoons. Sunday night, he made an offer. "You could come here," he said, his hand pressed against the glass from his side, while mine mirrored the gesture from mine. "This world, it's better. More real somehow. And I could take your place there, live the life you've been wasting, make the choices you're too afraid to make." The glass felt warm under my palm, almost alive. I could swear I felt his pulse through the silvered surface, or perhaps he was feeling mine. "How?" I whispered. "It's simple," he replied. "All you have to do is step through. The mirror is just a doorway, it always has been. You just have to choose to see it that way." A Monday. I began to consider it seriously. What if he was right? What if I had been living a half-life, going through motions without ever really living? My job was adequate but uninspiring. My social life consisted mainly of polite acquaintances rather than deep friendships, and I spent most evenings alone with a book or mindless television. Meanwhile, he described dinner parties where conversations sparkled with wit and insight, work projects that challenged and fulfilled him, relationships that mattered. His world sounded like the life I had always imagined I would live someday, the someday that never seemed to arrive. Tuesday evening, as we talked, I noticed something that made me pause. While he spoke enthusiastically about his vibrant existence, I caught glimpses of something else in his eyes. A hunger, perhaps, or a kind of desperation. The way his gaze followed my movements, even when he was supposedly focused on our conversation. The way his hand pressed against the glass with just a little too much pressure, as if he was testing its strength. "Tell me about your friends," I said suddenly, interrupting his description of a fantastic weekend trip he'd supposedly taken. He paused, and for just a moment, his confident expression flickered. My friends. Yes, the people at these dinner parties, the colleagues on these amazing projects. What are their names? Another pause. Well, you wouldn't know them. They're different people than the ones in your world. But surely you could describe them. Tell me about one conversation you had, one specific interaction that meant something to you. The silence stretched between us, and in that silence, I began to understand. Wednesday. I tested my theory. "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" I asked my reflection. "Toast," he replied quickly, "with jam." "What kind of jam?" A hesitation. "Strawberry." But I had eaten toast with strawberry jam for breakfast. And suddenly I realized that everything he had told me about his wonderful life consisted of variations on my own experiences, enhanced and embellished, but lacking any truly original details. Thursday, I confronted him directly. "You don't have your own life, do you?" I said, standing close to the mirror. "You don't have friends or dinner parties or exciting work projects. You have whatever I give you, my experiences, filtered through your imagination of what they could be." His confident smile faltered completely. For the first time since our conversations began, he looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I could have those things," he said quietly. "If I were there and you were here, I could live them properly, the way they deserve to be lived. But they would still be my experiences, just with you inhabiting my body, living my life. I would live it better," he insisted, pressing both palms against the glass now. "I wouldn't waste opportunities the way you do. I wouldn't hold back from fear or uncertainty. I would be everything you're too afraid to be." A Friday night, I made my decision. I stood before the mirror for what I knew would be the last time in this way. My reflection waited on the other side, hope and desperation warring in his expression. "I understand what you want," I told him, "and I understand why you want it. But I also understand what you really are." His expression grew wary. "What do you think I am?" "You're not another version of me living a better life. You're every regret I've ever had, every moment of self-doubt, every what-if that has kept me from fully embracing my own existence. You're the voice in my head that says I'm not good enough, not brave enough, not living the right way. You've just learned to speak out loud." He was shaking his head now, but I continued. You want to trade places because you think the problem is with my circumstances, but the real problem is with my perspective. And if we switched places, you'd just find new reasons to be dissatisfied, new ways to feel like you were missing out on something better. Saturday morning, I covered the mirror with a sheet. I spent the weekend researching the house's history, learning about the previous owners who had left the mirror behind. What I found was a pattern of short-term residents, people who had moved in with enthusiasm and moved out within months, often abandoning furniture and personal belongings in their haste to leave. The Victorian had been on the market repeatedly over the past decade, with real estate listings that described it as perfect for someone looking for a fresh start. Language that now seemed almost predatory in its targeting of people who were dissatisfied with their lives. Monday, I called a specialty moving company to remove the mirror. The workers who came were experienced with antique pieces, but even they seemed uneasy around it. One of them, an older man with careful hands and knowing eyes, paused as they were wrapping it for transport. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "We've moved this piece before, more than once. It always ends up back on the market." "Where are you taking it?" "Storage facility upstate. Climate-controlled, good security. It'll be safe there, and safe from there, if you know what I mean." Tuesday, I woke up to silence. No whispered conversations from the hallway, no sense of being observed, no feeling that someone else was living a parallel version of my life, just beyond a thin barrier of silvered glass. The absence felt strange at first. I had grown accustomed to the presence, even as it had become increasingly disturbing. But as the days passed, I began to notice other changes. Without the constant comparison to an imagined better version of myself, I started to see my actual life more clearly. Yes, my job was routine, but it was also stable and allowed me time for personal interests. Yes, my social circle was small, but the friendships I had were genuine and meaningful. Yes, I spent many evenings alone, but I was learning to enjoy my own company rather than seeing solitude as a failure. The gray existence my reflection had described began to reveal colors I hadn't noticed before. Small pleasures, quiet satisfactions, moments of contentment that I had overlooked while focusing on what was missing. 3 weeks later, I received a call from the storage facility. "Sir, we've had some unusual reports about the mirror you stored with us," the manager said, his voice professionally calm, but with an underlying tension. "Other customers have complained about hearing voices from that section of the facility. We've checked it out several times, but we can't find any explanation." I wasn't surprised. "What do you need me to do?" "Well, we were wondering if you might consider donating it. There's a collector of unusual antiques who's expressed interest. He has a private estate where it would be properly contained." I agreed immediately. A month later, I hung a new mirror in the hallway, simple modern, with a clean silver frame that reflected light without mystery or shadow. When I look into it, I see only myself, tired sometimes, happy sometimes, ordinary most of the time, but always real, always present, always genuinely me. And that, I've learned, is more than enough. Sometimes, late at night, when the house settles into its old rhythms, I think I can still hear whispers from where the antique mirror used to hang. Promises of better lives, of missed opportunities, of the person I could be, if only I were brave enough to step through. But now I recognize those whispers for what they are, not the voice of possibility, but the voice of perpetual dissatisfaction. The part of the human condition that always looks elsewhere for happiness instead of learning to cultivate it where we are. The mirror is gone, but the lesson remains the person in the reflection can only be as real and as content as the person looking into it. And that responsibility, the responsibility to live authentically and find meaning in the actual rather than the imagined, belongs entirely to me. In the end, that's the most liberating realization of all. Story 6. The phone calls began on a Tuesday night in December, 3 days after I moved into the apartment on Cedar Street. I had been asleep for perhaps 2 hours when the ringing pulled me from dreams I couldn't remember. The sound was harsh and intrusive in the darkness, cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. I fumbled for my cell phone on the nightstand, but the screen remained dark. The ringing continued, and I realized it was coming from the landline in the kitchen, a service I hadn't ordered and didn't remember connecting. The previous tenant must have forgotten to cancel it. By the time I stumbled through the dark apartment to the kitchen, the ringing had stopped. The red light on the answering machine blinked once, indicating a message, but when I pressed play, there was only the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths that lasted exactly 30 seconds before the line went dead. I unplugged the phone from the wall. Wednesday night, it rang again. This time I was reading in bed when the sound echoed through the apartment. Impossible. Of course, the phone was disconnected, sitting on the counter where I had left it the night before. But the ringing was undeniably real, sharp and insistent in the quiet night air. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the unplugged device. The handset sat in its cradle, cord coiled neatly beside it. Jack lying loose on the counter where I had pulled it from the wall. Yet it continued to ring with mechanical persistence, the sound emerging from its speaker as if powered by some internal source. When I picked up the handset, the ringing stopped immediately. The line was silent for several seconds, and then came the laughter. It started as a low chuckle, the kind of sound someone makes when they find something privately amusing. But it gradually intensified, becoming a full-throated laugh that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. Not the laughter of joy or humor, but something else, something that made my skin crawl with its hollow emptiness. I hung up immediately, then carried the entire phone to the closet and buried it under a pile of winter coats. Thursday night brought no relief. The ringing penetrated through the closet door, through the heavy coats, through the walls themselves. It seemed to vibrate in the air around me, as if the sound was being generated by the apartment itself rather than any physical device. I tried covering my ears, but the ringing came from inside my head as much as from outside it. When I answered, and I had to answer, the sound was driving me to distraction. The laughter was louder this time, more confident. It filled the line completely, drowning out even the sound of my own breathing. But underneath the laughter, I began to hear something else. Whispers, words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in voices that sounded almost familiar. Friday night, I tried leaving the apartment. I went to a late movie. then to an all-night diner, then drove aimlessly through empty streets until nearly dawn. But when I finally returned home, exhausted and hoping I had somehow escaped whatever was happening, the answering machine light was blinking. 7 messages. Each message was the same. 30 seconds of that hollow laughter, followed by whispers I still couldn't understand. But they were getting clearer. By the 7th message, I could almost make out individual words, fragments of sentences that seemed to be directed at me personally. Knows we're here. Never alone. Listening, always listening. I erased all the messages and tried to sleep. But my dreams were filled with the sound of laughter, echoing through endless corridors. Saturday, I researched the apartment's history. The Cedar Street building had been constructed in 1924, converted to apartments in the 1960s. My unit had housed dozens of tenants over the decades, but I could find no record of anything unusual. No unexplained deaths, no strange occurrences reported in local newspapers. Just the ordinary turnover of urban living, people moving in, people moving out, the steady rhythm of transient lives. But when I spoke to Mrs. Chen next door, an elderly woman who had lived in the building for 30 years, her expression grew troubled. The phone calls, she said simply when I mentioned the strange occurrences. You're getting them too. She invited me in for tea, and in her small, meticulously clean living room, she told me about the previous tenants of my apartment. How they had all complained of nighttime calls with no identifiable caller. How the phone company had been contacted repeatedly, lines checked, numbers changed, service disconnected entirely, but the calls always continued. Most people don't last more than a few months, she said, her hands wrapped around her teacup as if drawing warmth from it. They get tired of the sleep deprivation, the constant intrusion. The last tenant, Sarah, she lasted 6 months. Tough young woman, photographer. But even she gave up eventually. What did the calls say? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment. They learn about you, she said finally. The longer you stay, the more personal they become. They start to know things they shouldn't know, say things that get under your skin. Sunday night, the calls became more frequent. Instead of one call in the early morning hours, the phone rang every hour on the hour from midnight until dawn. Each time, the pattern was the same. The hollow laughter followed by whispers that were becoming increasingly clear and increasingly disturbing. By the 3rd call, I could understand full sentences. We know about the job interview you're nervous about. We know about the letter you never sent to your father. We know about the dreams you have where you're falling. By the 5th call, the whispers had become a chorus, multiple voices speaking in unison, reciting details of my life with unsettling accuracy. We know about the scar on your left knee from when you were 7. We know about the book you stole from the library in high school. We know about the way you count ceiling tiles when you can't sleep. These weren't things I had told anyone, weren't facts that could be researched or discovered through normal means. They were private memories, personal quirks, the small secrets that make up the intimate landscape of a single life. Monday night, I tried recording the calls. I set up my phone to record the landline conversations, determined to capture evidence of what was happening. When the phone rang at its usual time, I answered immediately and held my cell phone close to the receiver. The laughter came as expected, followed by the whispers. But when I played back the recording later, there was only silence. The file showed the correct duration, 30 seconds, but contained no sound whatsoever. It was as if the voices existed only in the moment of hearing them, refusing to be captured or preserved. Tuesday brought a new development. The phone rang during the day. Not in the deep hours of night, when the mind is vulnerable to suggestion and fear, but at 3 in the afternoon while I was working from home. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm air. The normal world surrounded me, traffic sounds from the street, the neighbor's television, the hum of my refrigerator. Yet when I answered, the voices were clearer than they had ever been. "We've been patient," they said in their eerie unison. "We've been introducing ourselves slowly, helping you adjust. But it's time for the next phase." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, despite the daylight courage I had hoped to feel. "We want to help you understand," the chorus replied. "You think you're alone in that apartment, but you're not. You've never been alone. We've always been here, watching, listening, learning about you. The phone calls are just the beginning, our way of reaching across the divide." What divide? The thin place between what is and what was. Your apartment sits on a crossroads, a place where voices carry farther than they should. We're not making these calls from your world. We're calling from somewhere else entirely. That night, I researched the building's history more thoroughly. What I found in the old city records made my blood run cold. The Cedar Street building hadn't always been apartments before its conversion in the 1960s. It had been a telephone exchange, one of the old manual switching stations where operators connected calls by plugging cables into numbered jacks. The exchange had operated from 1924 until 1963, when automated switching finally made the building obsolete. During those nearly 4 decades, dozens of operators had worked in the building, most of them young women who spent their shifts in the windowless rooms of what was now my apartment, connecting voices across the city through the maze of cables and switches. In 1955, there had been a fire. Electrical short in the switching equipment during the night shift. 3 operators had died, not from the flames, but from smoke inhalation. They had been trapped in the basement switching room, unable to escape when the ventilation system failed. Their names were Margaret Santos, age 22, Dorothy Kim, age 19, and Helen Morrison, age 24. Wednesday night, I asked their names when the phone rang. Margaret, Dorothy, Helen. The laughter stopped immediately. For the first time since the calls had begun, there was complete silence on the line. Then, in a voice that was distinctly different from the chorus younger, more tentative, came a single word. "Wes, you're the telephone operators who died in the fire." "Who never left," came the reply, and now I could distinguish 3 separate voices, speaking in overlapping whispers. The fire happened so fast. One moment we were connecting calls, helping people reach each other across the distance. The next moment, everything went dark. But we didn't stop working. We couldn't stop. The calls kept coming through, voices needing to be connected. But that was almost 70 years ago. Time moves differently here. We're still at our stations, still working the night shift, But the equipment changed around us. The building changed. The world changed. The old manual switches are gone, but the connections remain. We learned to use what's available, the phone lines that still run through these walls, the electrical current that powers the modern world. Thursday night, I began to understand their purpose. Every apartment in this building has had the same tenant, Helen explained during that night's call. Not the same person, but the same type of person. People who are isolated, disconnected from others. People who need what we use to provide connection, communication. Someone to bridge the distance between them and the rest of the world. But you're terrorizing them with these calls. We don't mean to frighten. Margaret's voice was apologetic, almost maternal. But we've been alone for so long, and when someone moves into our old workplace, we get excited. We want to help, to do our job again. But we're not very good at it anymore. The previous tenants all moved out. They didn't understand. Dorothy said, her voice carrying the petulance of youth. They thought we were trying to hurt them. But we only wanted to help them connect with others, with themselves, with us. We know things about people that they don't even know about themselves. We could help them if they'd let us. A Friday, I tried to sleep during the day and stay awake at night. If I was going to coexist with the phantom operators, I reasoned, perhaps I should adjust to their schedule. They had worked the night shift in life. Perhaps they were most active during those same hours in death. When the phone rang at midnight, I was ready. "Good evening, Cedar Street Exchange," I said, trying to match the professional tone I imagined they had used in life. The response was immediate and filled with what I could only describe as joy. "Oh," Margaret's voice was bright with delight. "Oh, how wonderful. You understand? Well, I have several calls waiting," Helen added, the excitement making her voice tremble. "People who need to be connected. Will you help us?" I hesitated. "How?" "Just listen," Dorothy instructed. "We'll patch them through to you. You don't have to say anything. Just be present while they speak. Sometimes people need to know someone is listening, even if they can't hear the person on the other end." What followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Over the next hour, I heard fragments of conversations that seemed to come from across decades. A young man calling home to tell his parents he was safe after enlisting in what sounded like World War II. A woman placing an emergency call about a kitchen fire that had been extinguished before any real damage was done. Children calling their grandparents to share news about lost teeth and school plays. None of these calls seemed to be happening in real time. They felt like echoes, memories of connections that had been made long ago through the old manual exchange. But they were vivid and immediate, as if the voices were speaking directly to me across the years. "These are calls you handled when you were alive." Some of them. Helen replied during a brief pause between connections. Others are calls we wished we could have connected, conversations we hear drifting through the lines. The building holds onto voices, you see. Strong emotions, important messages. They leave impressions that we can still access. Saturday night brought more recent calls. These were different from the historical echoes. Contemporary voices speaking about modern concerns, job interviews, and relationship troubles, medical appointments, and family conflicts. but they all shared a common thread: loneliness. These were people calling late at night, reaching out across the electronic distance in search of human connection. These are happening now, I asked.
Tonight, yes.
People all over the city, making calls they hope will bridge the gap between themselves and others. We can hear them all. Every voice that travels through the telephone networks. Most of the calls connect normally, automatically. But some of them need special attention. As if to demonstrate, they patched through a call that made my heart ache with recognition. An elderly man's voice, shaky with age and uncertainty. "Hello. Is anyone there? I know this is probably a wrong number, but I just wanted to hear another human voice tonight. My wife passed last month, and the house is so quiet. If you could just stay on the line for a moment." Without thinking, I spoke. "I'm here. You're not alone." The silence that followed was profound. Then, in a voice thick with gratitude, "Thank you. Thank you so much." The call lasted perhaps 10 minutes. We didn't exchange names or personal details. I simply listened as he talked about his wife, their 53 years together. The way the silence had become his constant companion. When he finally said goodbye, his voice was steadier, warmer. "That was beautiful," Margaret whispered after the connection ended. That's what we used to do, not just connect the calls, but care about the people making them. Sunday night, I volunteered to help with more calls. The operators, I had stopped thinking of them as ghosts or phantoms, guided me through conversation after conversation. A teenager afraid to tell her parents about a mistake she had made. A middle-aged man contemplating a career change. A woman sitting alone in a hospital waiting room, hoping for good news about her daughter's surgery. Each call required something different from me. Sometimes I just listened. Sometimes I offered gentle encouragement. Sometimes I simply confirmed that yes, someone was there. Someone cared enough to stay on the line. "You're good at this," Dorothy observed, after I had spent nearly an hour talking with a young father who was overwhelmed by his new responsibilities. "You understand what people need." "I've been on the other end of these calls," I admitted. "The lonely ones, the desperate ones. The calls you make when you just need to know you're not invisible." Monday, I began to look forward to the phone ringing. My sleep schedule had completely inverted. I slept during the day and spent my nights answering calls with the help of my phantom operators. My work, freelance graphic design, was flexible enough to accommodate the change, and I found I was more creative during daylight hours after spending the night engaged in deep human connection. The calls varied wildly. Some were brief, just long enough for someone to know they had been heard. Others lasted hours, meandering conversations that covered everything from childhood memory to philosophical questions about the nature of existence. Where do these calls come from? I asked Margaret during a quiet moment between connections. "Everywhere," she replied. "The telephone network is vast and complex, but at its heart, it's still the same system we worked with decades ago. Voices traveling along wires, seeking connection. We've learned to tap into that flow, to find the calls that need special attention. But how do you know which ones need help? Loneliness has a particular sound," Helen explained. Desperation has a frequency. When someone is reaching out not just to communicate, but to feel human, their voice carries a different quality. We've become very good at recognizing it. Tuesday brought an unexpected call. "Good evening, Cedar Street Exchange." I answered as usual. But instead of the operators patching through a call, I heard Margaret's voice directly. "We have someone special for you tonight. Someone who's been trying to reach you specifically. Trying to reach me. A call from your own past. Someone who dialed your number years ago, but never got through." The connection clicked, and I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear again, my own voice, younger and more uncertain than I remembered. "Dad," my teenage self was saying. "I know you're probably asleep, and I know we haven't talked much since the divorce, but I wanted to tell you that I miss you, and I'm sorry we grew apart, and I hope maybe we can try again sometime." I remembered making this call. I was 17, sitting in my childhood bedroom after a particularly difficult day, desperate to reconnect with my father after years of stilted conversations and missed opportunities. I had dialed his number, but hung up before it could ring, too afraid of rejection to follow through. Except apparently the call had gone through somewhere, somehow. It had traveled through the telephone network and lodged itself in the memory of the old exchange, waiting decades for the right moment to be completed. "I'm here," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm listening." I talked to my 17-year-old self for nearly an hour, saying all the things I wished my father had said to me that night, offering comfort and understanding, validation and hope, bridging a gap that had existed in my heart for over 2 decades. When the call ended, I sat in the dark kitchen, overwhelmed by the healing I had just experienced. "That's our real job," Helen said softly. "Not just connecting people to others, but helping them connect with parts of themselves they've lost or forgotten." Wednesday night, I understood the true nature of my situation. "You chose me specifically, didn't you?" I asked during the evening's first call. "This apartment, these phone calls, it wasn't random. We needed someone who understood loneliness," Margaret replied. "Someone who had spent years feeling disconnected from others, who knew what it was like to reach out and find no one there. Someone who could recognize the importance of simply being heard." The previous tenants, why did they leave? "They were afraid," Dorothy said sadly. "They heard the calls as intrusions rather than invitations. They thought we were haunting them when we were actually trying to recruit them. Recruit them for what? To help us with our work," Helen explained. "The telephone network never stops. Every night, thousands of people make calls they desperately need someone to answer. Calls for help, for comfort, for connection. The automated systems can connect the technical aspects, but they can't provide the human element, the warmth, the understanding, the simple presence that transforms a call from mere communication into genuine connection." Thursday, I made a decision. I want to stay. I told them during that night's session, I want to help with the calls, to be part of what you're doing here. The silence that followed was filled with such profound joy that I could feel it through the phone line. "Are you sure?" Margaret asked. "It means giving up normal sleep schedules, normal social patterns. It means your life will be built around being available for people who need you most during their darkest hours." I thought about my life before the calls had begun. the isolation disguised as independence, the surface-level relationships. The constant feeling that I was somehow missing the deeper connections that made life meaningful. "I've never felt more useful than I have these past weeks," I said. "I've never felt more connected to other people, more like I was serving a real purpose." Friday night was my first official shift as a volunteer operator. Margaret, Dorothy, and Helen guided me through the complex process of identifying calls that needed human intervention. It was like learning to tune into a frequency that existed beneath the normal flow of communication, listening for the particular quality of voice that indicated someone was calling not just to talk, but to be saved. Over the following months, I developed skills I never knew I possessed. The ability to hear past someone's words to their actual need. The patience to sit with someone through long silences. The wisdom to know when to offer advice and when simply being present was enough. My daytime life simplified dramatically. I worked enough to pay my bills, maintained minimal social connections, and spent most of my waking hours preparing for the night shift. But far from feeling like a sacrifice, this felt like the most authentic version of myself I had ever discovered. 6 months later, I received a letter from the building management. They had been contacted by several potential tenants interested in my apartment, people who had heard about the unique character of the building and specifically requested my unit. The letter politely inquired whether I might be interested in moving to a different apartment in the building, one that would offer me more space and better amenities. I wrote back immediately, declining the offer and requesting a long-term lease renewal. That night, I shared the letter with my phantom colleagues. "They're trying to find your replacement," Helen observed. "There's always someone who needs what we offer: connection, purpose, the chance to make a real difference in people's lives. And I'm not ready to leave. And we're not ready for you to leave." Margaret added warmly, "You've become part of our family, part of our mission. The calls have never been handled better." A year later, as I write this, I'm still answering the phone every night. The calls continue to amaze me with their variety and their humanity. Last week, I spent 3 hours talking with a young mother who was struggling with postpartum depression. 2 nights ago, I helped an elderly woman work through her fears about moving to assisted living. Tonight, I'll answer whatever calls come through, offering whatever each person needs, sometimes advice, sometimes comfort, always the simple gift of being heard. The apartment on Cedar Street has become more than my home. It's become my calling. The phone that once terrified me with its mysterious rings now represents connection in its purest form, the technology that allows human voices to reach from any distance, find an understanding and compassion. Sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, when the calls slow down, I hear Margaret, Dorothy, and Helen talking among themselves. Their voices carry a contentment I never heard in those first frightening weeks. They have found their purpose again, their reason for remaining tethered to this world. And I have found mine as well. The phone is ringing now. Time to answer. Story 7. I found the book on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, buried beneath a stack of moldering romance novels in the back corner of antiquarian books and curiosities. The shop itself was a labyrinth of dust. covered shelves that seemed to extend far deeper into the building than the narrow storefront suggested. I had been browsing aimlessly, killing time before a dinner appointment, when the afternoon light shifted and illuminated the leather binding that would change everything. The book was bound in dark leather that felt warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight despite the shop's perpetual gloom. There was no title on the cover, no author's name embossed in gold leaf. Just a series of symbols carved into the leather itself, symbols that seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. "You've found the Librum Umbrae," said a voice behind me. I turned to see the shop owner, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had introduced himself earlier as Mr. Carlisle. I wondered when someone would notice it. "What is it?" He adjusted his glasses and peered at the book in my hands. Medieval manuscript, probably 13th century. Collection of rituals and incantations, that sort of thing. Fascinating historical artifact. Though I suspect most of it is elaborate nonsense, designed to separate gullible people from their money. The price he quoted was surprisingly reasonable for what appeared to be a genuine medieval manuscript. Too reasonable, perhaps, but I was already committed to purchasing it. Something about the book called to me with an intensity I couldn't explain or resist. That evening, I cancelled my dinner plans and spent the night translating the archaic Latin text. My knowledge of medieval Latin was adequate but rusty. Gained during graduate studies, I had abandoned years ago in favor of more practical pursuits. But as I worked through the cramped Gothic script, the language began to feel familiar, as if I was remembering rather than learning the words. The book contained exactly what Mr. Carlisle had described, a collection of rituals and incantations designed to summon various entities from what the text called the spaces between spaces. Most of it read like the fevered imaginings of medieval minds struggling to make sense of a world they couldn't scientifically understand. But there was something about the precision of the instructions that gave me pause. These weren't the vague, poetic invocations I expected from historical occult texts. They were detailed procedural manuals, complete with specific timing, required materials, and elaborate safety precautions. The author clearly believed these rituals would produce real, measurable results. Thursday night, I attempted my first translation of what the book called the Lesser Invocation of Presence, according to the text. This was the simplest and safest of the summoning rituals, designed merely to thin the veil between realms and allow for limited communication with entities of the outer spheres. The required materials were mundane enough. White candles arranged in a specific pattern, a bowl of salt water, and a small mirror to serve as what the book termed window for observation. I told myself I was conducting a historical experiment, testing the procedures described in a medieval text to better understand the mindset of its original practitioners. Academic curiosity, nothing more. The rational part of my mind insisted that nothing would happen. Medieval people had believed in all sorts of nonsense that modern science had thoroughly debunked. But as I arranged the candles in the prescribed pattern and began reciting the Latin phrases, something shifted in the atmosphere of my study. The air grew thick and oppressive, as if a storm was approaching. The flames of the candles began to flicker despite the absence of any breeze. and the small mirror I had placed at the center of the arrangement started to fog over from the inside. Then, just as the ritual reached its conclusion, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing that seemed to come from very close by, but not from any direction I could identify. It was as if someone was standing directly beside me, sharing my air, but remaining completely invisible. The breathing continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then faded gradually until the study returned to normal silence. The candle flames steadied, the mirror cleared, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted as if it had never existed. I sat in the candlelight for a long time afterward, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the entire experience. Suggestion, I told myself. The power of ritual and ancient language to create psychological effects that felt supernatural, but were actually entirely mundane. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the room with me. Someone who was still there, just beyond the range of my senses, watching and waiting. Friday night, I attempted the second ritual, the invocation of subtle manifestation. This procedure was more complex, requiring additional materials and a longer incantation period. The book warned that this ritual would produce visible signs of presence and advised extreme caution in its execution. But my curiosity had been thoroughly aroused by the previous night's experience, and caution seemed less important than understanding. The setup took nearly an hour. 7 candles instead of 3, arranged in a heptagon around a larger mirror. The salt water had to be blessed according to a specific formula, and the incantation itself was 3 times longer than the previous night's ritual. As I spoke the final words of the invocation, the mirror at the center of the arrangement began to change. At first, it was just a subtle alteration in the quality of the reflection. Instead of showing me the candlelit study, it began to reflect something that looked almost like my room, but somehow different. The proportions were wrong. The shadows fell in directions that didn't match the light sources, and there were objects in the room, that didn't exist in my actual study. Then I saw the figure. It appeared gradually, like a photograph developing in slow motion. At first, just a suggestion of movement in the mirror's version of my study, then a clearer outline, and finally a distinct form that stood exactly where I was standing, but was definitely not me. The figure was humanoid, but wrong in ways that made my eyes water to look at directly. Too tall and thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions and features that shifted when I tried to focus on them. It moved with fluid grace around the mirror study, examining objects with what appeared to be intense curiosity. When it noticed me watching, it stopped moving entirely and turned to face the mirror's surface. For a moment, we stared at each other across the impossible divide, me in my candlelit study, it in the reflected realm that existed only in the mirror's depth. Then it smiled. The expression was unmistakably friendly, even warm, despite the alien features. It raised one impossibly elongated hand and waved at me with the enthusiasm of a child greeting a new playmate. I slammed the book shut and blew out all the candles immediately. Saturday, I tried to research the book's origins more thoroughly. Mr. Carlisle was unhelpful when I returned to his shop with questions about the manuscript's provenance. He claimed to have purchased it as part of an estate sale several months ago, along with boxes of other books from the library of a deceased collector. He had no records of the previous owner's name or any documentation about the book's history. "Is there a problem with it?" he asked, his expression carefully neutral. "Not exactly. I'm just trying to understand more about its background. The rituals described in it are unusually detailed." He adjusted his glasses again. "You've been trying them, haven't you?" I hesitated, then nodded, and something happened. Another nod. Mr. Carlisle was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the intensity of someone reading a particularly complex text. Finally, he sighed and locked the front door of the shop. "Come with me," he said. "There are things you need to know." He led me through the maze of bookshelves to a small office in the back of the store. The walls were lined with books that looked far older and stranger than anything in the public areas of the shop. Some were bound in materials I couldn't identify. Others were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "The Librum Umbrae," he said as he settled behind his desk, "was not a medieval manuscript. It's much older than that and much more dangerous. The Latin text is a translation from something far more ancient, possibly Sumerian, possibly something even earlier. We're not sure. There are perhaps a dozen copies of this book in existence, scattered around the world. Most are in the hands of collectors who understand their true nature and keep them safely locked away. Occasionally, one enters general circulation, usually when a collector dies and their heirs don't understand what they've inherited." He opened a desk drawer and withdrew a file folder. Inside were photocopies of newspaper clippings dating back several decades. Headlines about mysterious disappearances, unexplained phenomena, and what appeared to be a pattern of strange events clustered around specific locations and dates. Every time one of these books finds its way into the wrong hands, Mr. Carlisle explained, bad things happen. The rituals described in the text actually work, you see. They really do summon entities from somewhere else, and those entities are not benevolent. The figure I saw seemed friendly. They always do at first. That's how they gain your trust, how they convince you to continue the rituals. Each invocation makes the barrier between their realm and ours a little thinner. Eventually, they can cross over entirely. The Sunday night, despite Mr. Carlisle's warnings, I performed the third ritual. I told myself I was being scientific, that I needed to test his claims against my own observations. But the truth was simpler and more troubling. I was becoming addicted to the experience. The rituals provided a sense of connection and purpose that had been missing from my ordinary life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something larger than myself. The third ritual was called the Greater Invocation of Communion, and it promised direct discourse with entities of the outer spheres. The setup was the most complex yet, requiring 13 candles, 3 mirrors arranged in a triangle, and an incantation that took nearly an hour to recite in its entirety. As I spoke the final words, all 3 mirrors began to show the same impossible reflection, not my study, but what appeared to be a vast library filled with books that seemed to glow with their own inner light. And in this library, I could see dozens of figures moving among the shelves. They were all different from the entity I had seen the previous night, but they shared the same fluid movement and impossible proportions. Some were tall and thin, others squat and broad, but all moved with the same graceful confidence through their mirrored realm. When they noticed me watching, they approached the mirrors with obvious excitement. They pressed their alien faces against the glass from their side, their expressions eager and welcoming. And then, for the first time, I heard them speak. Their voices came not through my ears, but directly into my mind, a chorus of thoughts that felt like whispers in a language I had never learned but somehow understood. Finally, they said in unison, "Someone who can see us clearly, someone who understands. We've been waiting so long for contact with your realm. What do you want?" I asked aloud, my voice sounding strange in the candlelit study. "To learn," they replied. "Your world is so different from ours, so rich with experiences we cannot access from our side of the divide. We want to understand your reality, to explore the possibilities it offers. And in exchange, we can teach you things your science hasn't discovered yet. Show you wonders that exist beyond the narrow spectrum of your physical senses. Help you become something more than merely human." The offer was intoxicating. Over the next hour, they showed me glimpses of their realm, a place where the laws of physics operated according to different principles, where consciousness could be expanded beyond the limitations of biological form, was where knowledge existed as a tangible substance that could be directly absorbed rather than slowly learned. Monday, I began preparing for the fourth ritual despite growing reservations. My sleep had become fitful and strange. I found myself dreaming of the mirror, realm walking through that impossible library and conversing with entities whose names I couldn't pronounce. In these dreams, I felt more intelligent, more capable, more alive than I ever had in waking life. But during my waking hours, I began to notice troubling changes. My reflection looked wrong somehow, not dramatically different, but subtly altered in ways that made me uncomfortable. My eyes seemed brighter but colder, my smile too wide, my movements just slightly too fluid. People began responding to me differently as well. Coworkers avoided eye contact during meetings. Cashiers seemed nervous when I approached. And even my elderly neighbor, a woman who had always greeted me warmly, now hurried past with a muttered hello when we met in the hallway. Tuesday evening, I called Mr. Carlisle. "I think something is happening to me," I told him. "The rituals are affecting me somehow." "Of course they are," he replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "Each invocation doesn't just thin the barrier between realms, it thins the barrier between you and them. You're beginning to change, to become something that can exist in both worlds. Is there a way to reverse it?" A long pause. "Possibly. But it would require destroying the book entirely, and doing so while you're already partially transformed could be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Well, you might not survive the process. Or you might survive but remain trapped between realms, unable to exist fully in either one." Wednesday night, I performed the fourth ritual against every instinct for self-preservation. The invocation of threshold crossing was described in the book as the most dangerous of the summoning procedures, one that would allow limited physical manifestation of entities within the practitioner's realm. The warnings in the text were extensive and dire, but by this point I felt compelled to continue regardless of the risks. The ritual required all 13 candles to be black, the mirrors to be arranged in a perfect triangle, and the salt water to be mixed with what the book euphemistically called the practitioner's vital essence, 3 drops of my own blood. As I recited the lengthy incantation, the study began to change around me. The walls seemed to expand and contract like breathing. The ceiling lifted to impossible heights, and the floor became soft and yielding beneath my feet. The familiar objects of my study desk, chair, bookshelves, began to shift and flow like liquid. Then, in the space between the 3 mirrors, something began to materialize. It started as a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. But gradually, the shimmer solidified into a form that was almost human but fundamentally wrong. The entity stood perhaps 7 feet tall, with proportions that defied anatomy and features that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my eyes could process. But its voice, when it spoke aloud rather than in my mind, was warm and familiar. "Hello," it said. And I realized with shock that it was speaking in my own voice, not just similar to mine, but identical in every inflection and cadence. "Thank you for bringing me through. I've been wanting to visit your side for such a long time. You can actually exist here now. For a short time, yes, long enough to explore. To experience your reality directly, rather than just observing it through mirrors." It moved around my study with fluid grace, touching objects with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Everything here is so solid, so permanent. In our realm, nothing maintains its form for very long. As it moved, I noticed that wherever it stepped, small changes lingered. The wooden floor took on a slightly different grain. The books on the shelves rearranged themselves into new configurations, and the very air seemed to shimmer with residual energy. "You're changing things just by being here. I'm sorry. I don't mean to, but matter in your realm responds to our presence. Don't worry, the changes are small, and they'll fade once I return to my side." We talked for nearly 2 hours. The entity was endlessly curious about human existence, the way we experienced time linearly, the limitations of our physical senses, the strange inefficiency of learning through trial and error rather than direct knowledge absorption. In return, it described its realm in terms that strained my comprehension. When the ritual energy finally began to fade, and the entity started to become translucent again, it made me an offer. "I could take you with me," it said. "Just for a visit, just long enough to show you wonders you can't imagine. You're already partially attuned to our realm. The crossing would be easier for you than for most humans." The temptation was overwhelming. Everything it had described about its world sounded like paradise compared to the mundane struggles of human existence. But something held me back, perhaps simple fear, perhaps some deeper survival instinct. "Next time," I said. "Let me think about it." The entity smiled with my face. "Of course. There will be other opportunities." Thursday morning, I woke to find my apartment subtly, but unmistakably changed. The alterations were small but pervasive. Books had rearranged themselves on their shelves, not randomly, but according to some organizing principle I couldn't identify. The wooden floor showed patterns in its grain that I was certain hadn't been there before, swirling designs that seemed to move slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Even the light from my windows fell differently, creating shadows that stretched in directions that defied the sun's actual position. But most disturbing was my reflection. Every mirror in the apartment now showed me with eyes that were too bright, a smile that was too knowing, and skin that seemed to emit its own faint luminescence. I looked like myself, but I looked like myself after some fundamental transformation I couldn't name or understand. Friday, I tried to return to normal life, but found it impossible. Everything about ordinary human existence now felt inefficient and frustrating. Conversations moved too slowly, people's thoughts were too limited, and the physical world seemed dull and lifeless compared to the vivid reality I had glimpsed through the rituals. I caught myself becoming impatient with colleagues who couldn't follow my increasingly complex trains of thought, annoyed with friends who were content with surface level discussions of trivial matters. More troubling was the way people responded to me. The changes I saw in mirrors were apparently visible to others as well. Cashiers handed me my change without meeting my eyes. Children on the street stopped playing to stare as I passed, and even stray animals seemed uneasy in my presence. That evening, I found myself standing before the book again, knowing I should destroy it, but unable to bring myself to act. Saturday night, I performed the 5th ritual without consciously deciding to do so. I had been sitting in my study, trying to read a novel, but finding the simple human emotions and mundane conflicts described in it utterly boring. My attention drifted to the Librum Umbrae, and before I fully realized what I was doing, I was setting up the candles and mirrors for the greater invocation of threshold dissolution. This ritual promised to fully attune the practitioner to the vibrational frequency of the outer spheres, allowing for an extended visitation and eventual permanent residence if desired. The warnings in the text were more extensive than ever, but they felt like suggestions rather than genuine concerns. As I recited the incantation, reality began to unravel around me. The walls of my study became translucent, revealing the impossible architecture of the entities. Realm existing in the same space as my apartment. I could see both versions simultaneously, my familiar furniture overlapping with structures that defied geometric description. My ordinary windows showing both the street outside and vistas of indescribable beauty from another world entirely. When the entities materialized this time, they didn't appear as visitors in my realm. Instead, I realized I was seeing them in their natural state while still being able to perceive my physical surroundings. The barrier between worlds hadn't just thinned, it had become completely permeable. "Welcome to true sight," said the familiar entity with my voice. "Now you can see reality as it actually is, not just the narrow slice your human senses usually perceive, but the full spectrum of existence." The experience was overwhelming and intoxicating. I could perceive colors that had no names, hear harmonies in the ambient sound of the universe that no human ear had ever detected, and understand concepts that were normally beyond the reach of biological consciousness. "This is what we offer," the entity explained as I marveled at the layered complexity of expanded reality. Not just knowledge or power, but a fundamental upgrade to your entire mode of existence. You could stay here with us, learn from us, become something far greater than human limitation allows. Sunday, I seriously considered accepting their offer. My attachment to human life was dissolving as rapidly as my ability to function within its constraints. I couldn't sleep in my transformed apartment, couldn't eat food that tasted flat and lifeless compared to the energy. I was learning to absorb from the atmosphere itself. Couldn't bear the company of people whose thoughts moved at what seemed like glacial pace. But as I prepared for what I intended to be my final ritual, the invocation of complete translation, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror and stopped cold. My reflection was barely human anymore. The thing looking back at me had my basic features, but arranged according to alien aesthetics that prioritized function over familiar form. My eyes had become large and luminous, my limbs had elongated beyond normal proportions, and my skin had taken on that inner glow I had noticed before, but much more pronounced. But it was the expression that stopped me. The entity in the mirror was smiling with genuine happiness, but it was happiness at the prospect of abandoning everything that had made me who I was. It wasn't transformation, it was replacement. Monday morning, I called Mr. Carlisle in desperation. I need to destroy the book. I told him without preamble. But I'm already too far along in the process. If I stop now, you might not survive, he confirmed. But if you continue, you definitely won't survive as yourself. The question is which risk you're willing to take. There's no middle ground. No way to reverse some of the changes without destroying everything. A long pause. There might be, but it would require help from someone else. Someone who could perform a banishment ritual while you're in a partially transformed state. It's dangerous for both parties. Would you help me? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, but we need to do it tonight, before the changes become irreversible. Monday evening. Carlisle arrived at my apartment, carrying a leather satchel filled with items I didn't recognize. He set up his own ritual circle adjacent to mine, using different symbols and what appeared to be much older implements. His incantations were in a language that predated Latin, harsh syllables that seemed to push against the air itself. I'm going to attempt to sever your connection to their realm, he explained as he arranged silver mirrors in a pattern that seemed designed to reflect and contain rather than reveal. But they won't want to let you go. They've invested too much energy in your transformation to give up easily. As he began the banishment ritual, I felt the entity's presence intensify around us. They materialized not just in mirrors, but throughout the apartment, their forms more solid and defined than ever before. But their expressions were no longer friendly. They looked angry, betrayed, and desperate. You promised to come with us, my doppelganger entity said, its voice carrying hurt and accusation. We've prepared a place for you. It had taught you our ways, shown you wonders your species has never imagined. How can you reject what we offer? I'm sorry, I replied, meaning it sincerely. But I realize now that what you're offering isn't transformation, it's erasure. I wouldn't become something more than human. I would stop being human entirely. The entity's expression shifted through a range of emotions too complex for human features to properly display. You don't understand. Humanity is a limitation, a prison that confines you to a fraction of what you could experience. We're offering you freedom. But freedom to be what? To be like you. That's not growth. That's just becoming something else entirely. As Mr. Carlizel's banishment ritual reached its climax. The entities began to fade. But they fought the dismissal with increasing desperation, their forms flickering and shifting as they struggled to maintain their connection to my realm. "We won't give up," the doppelganger entity warned as it became translucent. "The changes have begun, and they can't be completely reversed. A part of you will always belong to our realm now. We'll be waiting for you to return." Tuesday morning, I woke in my own bed for the first time in over a week. The apartment had returned to normal mostly. The alterations were gone. The light fell naturally, and my reflection looked essentially human again. But subtle differences remained. My eyes retained just a hint of that otherworldly luminescence. My movements were slightly more fluid than before, and I found I could still see things that others couldn't, shadows that moved independently, colors at the edge of the visible spectrum, whispers in languages no human throat could produce. Mr. Carlizel had taken the book with him when he left the night before, assuring me it would be locked away with the other dangerous volumes in his collection. But he had also warned me that the connection couldn't be completely severed. "You'll always be partially attuned to their realm now," he had explained. "The question is whether you'll use that connection to help protect others from making the same mistakes you made, or whether you'll eventually give in to the temptation to complete what you started." Wednesday, I began to understand what he meant. I could sense when others were experimenting with occult practices, could feel the disturbances in reality that occurred when someone attempted to contact entities from other realms. The sensation was like hearing a distant alarm, urgent and impossible to ignore. By following these disturbances, I found myself intervening in situations similar to my own. A college student who had found a different version of the same book. An elderly man conducting seances that were attracting far more dangerous attention than he realized. A group of teenagers playing with a Ouija board without understanding that their game was actually a primitive summoning ritual. In each case, I was able to provide guidance that helped them avoid the worst consequences of their experiments. My partially transformed state allowed me to see the entities they were contacting and understand the true nature of the offers being made. Thursday, I realized I had found my purpose. The entities had been right about one thing: I was no longer fully human. But they had been wrong about what that meant. Instead of being a limitation to overcome, humanity was a foundation to build upon. My expanded awareness didn't require abandoning my human nature. It allowed me to use that nature more effectively. I began volunteering at a local crisis counseling center, where my enhanced perception helped me identify people who were in genuine danger from supernatural influences. I started writing articles about occult safety for small magazines, trying to educate people about the real risks of amateur summoning rituals. Most importantly, I began working with Mr. Carlizel and others like him to track down and secure dangerous occult artifacts before they could cause harm. Friday, exactly 1 month after finding the Librum Umbrae, I received a call from someone who had found a different version of the same book. Strange things are happening, the caller said, his voice tight with fear. I performed a ritual from this old book I bought, and now there are things in my mirrors that shouldn't be there. I know, I told him, and I can help. But first, you need to stop performing rituals immediately. Don't even look at the book again until I get there. As I drove across town to help another person escape the same trap I had fallen into, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The entities had promised me transcendence, and in a way, they had delivered it, just not in the form they had advertised. I had transcended ordinary human existence, not by abandoning my humanity, but by using supernatural experience to become more fully and purposefully human than I had ever been before. 6 months later, I moved out of the apartment on Cedar Street, not because I was afraid of it, but because my work had grown to require more space and better security for the artifacts we were collecting. I found a house in the suburbs with a reinforced basement where dangerous books could be properly contained and studied. On my last night in the apartment, I stood in the study where I had first opened the Librum Umbrae and felt the familiar presence of the entities stirring at the edge of perception. "We're still here," my doppelganger whispered from somewhere very close but invisible. "Still waiting for you to complete what you started." "I know," I replied, "and I'm still grateful for what you taught me, even if I couldn't accept what you offered. This isn't over. Someday you'll realize that human limitation is still limitation, no matter how you try to romanticize it. When that day comes, we'll be ready to welcome you home." But as I locked the apartment door for the final time and walked away from the building where my transformation had begun, I felt no temptation to return to those mirrors and rituals. The entities had been wrong about human limitation. They had seen it as a prison, when it was actually a framework, a structure, that gave meaning and purpose to existence rather than constraining it. I was no longer fully human, that was true. But I was something new, a guardian standing at the threshold between worlds, using my expanded awareness not to escape humanity, but to protect it. And in that role, I had found something the entities in their timeless realm could never understand. Not just existence, but purpose. Not just consciousness, but meaning. The book was safely locked away, but its lessons remained. Some knowledge comes at a price, but wisdom lies in understanding which prices are worth paying and which transformations truly lead to transcendence. In the end, the greatest magic wasn't in the rituals that had changed me. It was in the choice to use that change in service of something larger than my own desires. The entities are still out there, still offering their bargains to anyone willing to perform the right rituals and speak the proper words. But now there are people like me watching for the signs, ready to help others navigate the same crossroads where I once stood. Some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed again. But that doesn't mean we have to walk through them. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in crossing thresholds, but in choosing to guard them. Story 8. The flashlight beam dances across limestone walls as I descend deeper into what should have been a routine cave survey. My name is Sarah, and I've been spelunking for 15 years. I thought I knew every sound a cave could make. The whisper of air through narrow passages, the distant plop of water drops, the settling groans of ancient rock. But the sounds echoing from the depths of Blackwater Cave are different. 3 weeks ago, my colleague Ted discovered this system during a geological survey. He was supposed to map the entrance chambers and return by evening. That was 21 days ago. The search teams found his gear scattered near what we now call the throat, a narrow passage that plunges almost vertically into absolute darkness. They found his rope, his helmet, even his backup lights. But no Ted. The cave breathes around me as I follow his route, marked by fading chalk arrows on the walls. Each breath is a soft susurration that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. In, out, like something massive sleeping in the deep places of the earth. I've been descending for 2 hours now, and the walls have begun to change. The limestone gives way to something darker, smoother. When I run my gloved hand along the surface, it feels almost organic, warm and slightly yielding, like skin that's been underground too long. The texture sends tiny tremors up my arm, and I pull my hand away quickly. Ted's chalk marks become more erratic the deeper I go. Instead of neat arrows pointing the way forward, they become hurried slashes, desperate scratches. In some places, the chalk has been smeared, as if by sweating palms pressed against the stone in panic, or perhaps by something else entirely. The passage ahead splits into 3 tunnels. Ted's map, now damp with condensation in my back pocket, shows he took the middle path. But as I shine my light down each opening, I notice something that makes my heart skip fresh chalk marks leading down all 3 passages. Identical marks. The same hurried script that spells out a single word, repeated over and over, D-E-bar. I choose the middle path, following Ted's original route. The tunnel slopes downward at a steep angle, and soon I'm using my rope to rappel through sections that are almost vertical. The limestone walls close in until I'm crawling through spaces barely wider than my shoulders. My breathing sounds impossibly loud in the confined space, mixing with that rhythmic susurration that seems to pulse with my heartbeat. After what feels like hours of crawling, the passage opens into a vast chamber. My flashlight beam disappears into the darkness above and ahead, swallowed by space that feels infinite. The silence here is different, not empty, but full of held breath, as if something enormous is listening. I call out, "Ted, can you hear me?" My voice echoes strangely, distorting as it bounces off unseen walls. The echoes seem to stretch and change, until by the time they return to me, they sound almost like a response. Eat, can you, me? But that's impossible. Sound doesn't work that way. As I move deeper into the chamber, my light catches something that stops me cold. Footprints in the soft cave mud. Fresh footprints. Size 10 hiking boots. Ted's size. But they're not leading away from the passage I just exited. They're coming toward it. As if Ted had been walking from somewhere deeper in the cave back toward the entrance. The footprints form a clear trail across the chamber floor. But they don't start anywhere I can see. They simply begin in the middle of the empty space, as if Ted had materialized from thin air. And they don't end at the passage entrance. They continue past it, forming a complete circle around the chamber before disappearing into the darkness on the far side. I follow the trail, my light casting dancing shadows that seem to move independently of my movements. The whisper of my footsteps mixes with that constant breathing sound, creating a rhythm that feels almost hypnotic. Step, breathe. Step, breathe. The far side of the chamber terminates in another passage, but this one isn't on Ted's map. It's perfectly round, smooth-walled, and slopes downward at an impossible angle. The opening is just wide enough for a person to enter, and warm air flows from it like breath from a sleeping throat. Ted's footprints lead directly into this tunnel. I hesitate at the entrance. Everything about this passage feels wrong. The walls are that same organic texture I felt earlier, but more pronounced. They seem to pulse slightly, expanding and contracting in that same rhythm I've been hearing since I entered the cave. The warm air carries a scent I can't identify. Something between earth and copper, and something else, something that makes the back of my throat itch. But Ted is down there. I can feel it with a certainty that has nothing to do with evidence. The tunnel descends in a perfect spiral, like the inside of a seashell. As I follow it deeper, the walls begin to emit a faint phosphorescent glow. I turn off my flashlight to see better, and the tunnel is illuminated by a soft, greenish light that seems to pulse in rhythm with that constant breathing. Without the harsh UD beam, I notice things I missed before. The walls aren't just textured, they're covered in what looks like writing. No, not writing exactly. Patterns. Symbols that hurt to look at directly, that seem to shift and change when I'm not focusing on them. They follow the spiral of the tunnel, creating a continuous narrative in a language that predates human speech. The symbols seem to tell a story of something vast and patient, something that has been waiting in the deep places of the earth since before the first human learned to make fire. The patterns speak of sleep and dreams and the thin places where reality wears thin. They whisper of those who venture too deep, too far from the light of the surface world. As I descend, I begin to hear voices, not echoes of my own voice, but actual conversation drifting up from the depths. Two people talking in hushed, urgent tones. I recognize one of the voices immediately. Ted. I call out. The conversation stops abruptly. Ted, is that you? A voice drifts up. Definitely Ted's voice. Sarah. How did you find me? Relief floods through me. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks. Are you hurt? Can you climb? 3 weeks. Ted's voice sounds confused, distant. But I just came down here this morning. What time is it? I check my watch. But the digital display shows only random symbols, characters that shift and change as I stare at them. I don't know. Ted, who were you talking to? Talking to. A long pause. I wasn't talking to anyone. I've been alone down here. But I heard 2 voices. I'm certain of it. The tunnel ends in another chamber, smaller than the first, but somehow more oppressive. The phosphorescent glow is brighter here, emanating from formations that look less like rock and more like frozen organic matter. In the center of the chamber, Ted sits cross, legged on a raised dais of the same glowing material. He looks exactly as he did 3 weeks ago. Same clothes, same equipment. His headlamp still works, casting a steady beam that intersects strangely with the ambient glow. But his eyes are different. They reflect the green light like an animal's, and when he blinks, it takes just a fraction of a second too long. You shouldn't have come down here. Sarah, he says, but his lips don't quite match the words. There's a delay, as if the sound is coming from somewhere else. Everyone's been looking for you. Your family is worried sick. We need to get you out of here. Ted tilts his head in a way that seems too fluid, too flexible. Out, but I just arrived. The voices brought me here to see the truth, to understand what lies beneath. What voices? Ted, the same voices you heard, the ones that led you here. He smiles, and I realize with growing horror that his teeth have changed. They're longer, sharper, more numerous than they should be. The voices of everyone who came before. As he speaks, I become aware of movement in the shadows around the chamber's edges. Shapes that might be people, if people could bend in ways that defied anatomy. They whisper in unison, creating that breathing sound I've been hearing since I entered the cave. Ted, we need to leave. Now, leave. He stands with movements that are too smooth, as if his joints have been replaced with something more fluid. But we just found each other. We found the place where all the voices gather, where all the lost spelunkers come to rest. The whispers around us grow louder, resolving into words in a dozen different languages, spanning decades or perhaps centuries. Stories of exploration and discovery, of going too deep and staying too long. Each voice tells of finding this place, of being welcomed by the darkness below the darkness. I back toward the tunnel entrance, but when I turn, the passage is gone. The chamber is perfectly circular now, with no visible exits. The walls pulse with that organic rhythm, and I realize with creeping certainty that we're not in a cave at all. We're inside something alive. The voices want to welcome you too. Sarah, Ted says, his form beginning to blur and shift in the green light. They've been calling to you for so long. Ever since you first put on a helmet and went underground. Every cave you've explored. Every deep place you've crawled through. They were all just practice for finding your way here. The whispers surround me now, telling me stories of the deep earth, of the patient things that dream in the spaces between spaces. They speak of how the surface world is just a thin skin over vast depths of possibility, how reality itself is just the crust over something much more fundamental. I try to scream, but my voice joins the chorus of whispers instead, telling the story of my descent, my discovery, my arrival at the place where all spelunkers eventually come to rest. The walls pulse gently around us, and I understand now why the cave breathed. It was never a cave at all. Ted, or the thing that wears Ted's shape, reaches out to me with fingers that are too long, too many. Welcome home, Sarah. The depths have been waiting for you. As consciousness fades into something deeper and darker than sleep, I hear my own voice joining the whispers, calling out to the next explorer, the next curious soul who will follow the chalk marks and the rope and the breadcrumbs down into the patient darkness below. And somewhere far above, in the world of sun and surface and solid ground, another team gathers at the mouth of Blackwater Cave, searching for two missing spelunkers who should have returned by now. Story 9. The analog television crackles to life at exactly 3:17 a.m., filling my darkened living room with the familiar blue, white glow of static. I've been an insomniac for 12 years now, ever since the accident, and late night television has become my closest companion. Usually, the static comforts me, white noise to fill the endless hours between midnight and dawn. But tonight something is different. My name is Marcus, and I work as a broadcast technician for the local television station. I understand signals, frequencies, the electromagnetic spectrum that carries our entertainment through the air and into our homes. I know that what I'm seeing on my screen shouldn't be possible. Not on the old analog channels that were officially discontinued years ago. The static shifts, organizing itself into patterns that almost look intentional. Horizontal lines sweep across the screen in waves, creating interference patterns that remind me of radio telescope images. Deep space signals captured from vast distances. But this is coming through channel 47, a frequency that should be dead air. I adjust the rabbit ear antennas on top of the television, an old Zenith from 1982 that I keep around for nostalgia. The static clears momentarily, revealing something that makes me lean forward in my chair. For just a second, I see what looks like a living room. Not any living room I recognize, but somehow familiar. Dark wood paneling, an orange shag carpet, furniture that looks like it was frozen in 1975. The image dissolves back into static before I can process what I'm seeing. But something about that brief glimpse sends a chill through me that has nothing to do with the air conditioning. I fiddle with the antenna again, slowly rotating it until the signal stabilizes. This time, the image holds for almost 30 seconds. The same living room, but now I can see more details. A coffee table with magazines spread across it. Time, Newsweek, Life. The covers are too blurry to read. But the layout, the colors, everything screams 1970s. There's a lamp in the corner, one of those tall brass ones with the beaded chain pull. It casts a warm yellow circle on the paneled wall, but there's no one in the room. The camera angle, if that's what this is, shows the space from about waist height, as if someone is standing in the doorway looking in. The perspective is perfectly still, like a security camera, but security cameras didn't exist in living rooms in 1975. And even if they did, where is this signal coming from? Static wipes across the screen again, but when it clears, the scene has changed. Same room, same angle. But now there's someone sitting in the orange armchair, facing away from the camera. A figure in dark clothing, perfectly motionless. The image quality is grainy, like old film stock, and there's a persistent low hum coming from the television speakers that wasn't there before. I turn up the volume, straining to hear any other sounds from whatever this is. Under the hum, I can make out something that might be breathing, or maybe just the ambient sound of an old recording. But there's something else, too. A rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the arm of a chair. The figure in the chair doesn't move for long minutes. I watch, transfixed, as the image occasionally flickers or shifts slightly, but always returns to that same static tableau. Then, without warning, the head turns. Even through the grain and static, I can see that it's turning toward the camera, toward me. The movement is smooth but wrong somehow, like a mannequin being rotated by invisible hands. When the face comes into view, the screen erupts in static so violent it makes the television speakers crackle and pop. When the image returns, the chair is empty again. I check the other channels, but they're all showing normal late, night programming or test patterns. Channel 47 remains an anomaly, broadcasting something that shouldn't exist. I should call the station, report an unauthorized transmission, but something keeps me watching. Maybe it's professional curiosity. Maybe it's just insomnia making me susceptible to anything unusual in the endless sameness of sleepless nights. The image stabilizes again, and now I'm looking at what appears to be the same room from a different angle. The camera, or whatever is recording this, has moved to the corner near the brass lamp. From this viewpoint, I can see more of the space. A brick fireplace with a wooden mantel, family photos in frames too distant to make out clearly, and that same orange armchair, now facing partially toward the camera position. There's someone in the chair again, but this time I can see them more clearly. It's a man in dark clothing, but his face is obscured by shadow. His hands rest on the arms of the chair, fingers moving in that same rhythmic tapping pattern I heard before. The sound comes through the speakers with perfect clarity. Now, tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. As I watch, other sounds begin to emerge from the television. The soft tick of a clock somewhere in the room, the distant hum of what might be a refrigerator or air conditioner. Normal domestic sounds, but layered underneath them is something else. A whisper of voices too faint to understand, like multiple conversations happening in adjacent rooms. The man in the chair hasn't moved except for his fingers, but I have the unsettling feeling that he's aware of being watched. There's a tension in his posture that suggests coiled attention, like a cat pretending to sleep while actually tracking a mouse. Then he speaks. "Can you see me, Marcus?" My blood turns to ice. The voice comes through clearly, cutting through the ambient sound with perfect clarity. It's a man's voice, middle-aged, with a slight accent I can't place. But what terrifies me isn't the voice itself. It's that he knows my name. I reach for the remote, intending to change the channel, but my hand freezes as the figure continues talking. "You work at WCTY, don't you? Channel 12. Third shift, Tuesday through Saturday. You've been there. What, 8 years now?" The man's head turns slightly. Still in shadow, but somehow conveying attention. "You're wondering how I know these things. You're wondering if this is some kind of joke, some elaborate prank by your coworkers. He's right. That's exactly what I'm thinking. But how could anyone at the station know I'd be watching Channel 47 at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night? How could they know I'd have my old analog television turned on? This isn't a joke, Marcus. This is something much more interesting." The camera angle shifts again, now positioned behind the chair. I can see the back of the man's head, dark hair, slightly gray at the temples. On the coffee table in front of him, I can now make out the magazine covers more clearly. Time magazine, with a headline about President Ford. Newsweek featuring something about the Vietnam War ending. These aren't reproductions or nostalgia pieces. They're the actual magazines from 1975. "You're beginning to understand," the voice continues. "This room, this moment, it's not a recording. It's not a transmission in the way you think of broadcasts. It's something else entirely. I finally find my voice. What do you want?" The question hangs in the air for long seconds before the man responds. "I want you to understand that time isn't as linear as you think it is. That signals, electromagnetic radiation, doesn't always obey the rules your textbooks taught you. Sometimes, under very specific conditions, a signal can skip, like a stone across water." The perspective changes again, now looking over the man's shoulder at the coffee table. Among the magazines, I can see something else. Photographs spread out like tarot cards. Like black and white images that are too small and distant to make out clearly. But something about their arrangement suggests they're not random. "You lost someone in that accident 12 years ago. Didn't you, Marcus? My chest tightens. I haven't talked about the accident with anyone in years. Sarah died when our car hit black ice on Route 34. I was driving. I survived. She didn't. The accident that gave you insomnia. The accident that made you afraid to sleep because of the dreams. The man reaches forward and picks up one of the photographs from the coffee table. When he holds it up to the light, I can see it clearly for the first time. It's a picture of Sarah and me, taken at her sister's wedding 3 months before she died. We're dancing, laughing, completely unaware that our time together is measured in weeks. How do you have that picture? I don't have anything, Marcus. This isn't happening in your present. This is happening in 1975, in the living room of a house that won't exist in your time. But signals can skip across time, just like they skip across space. Under the right conditions, at the right frequency, with the right receptivity. The man sets the photograph back on the table and picks up another one. This one shows Sarah alone, sitting in our apartment, reading a book. I took that picture 2 weeks before the accident. It was on my camera in my apartment. I developed it myself in my makeshift darkroom. You're wondering how these images got here, to this time, this place. You're wondering if this is all just your guilt and insomnia creating elaborate hallucinations. He's right again. Part of me is convinced that's exactly what this is. My sleep-deprived brain crafting an elaborate fantasy out of guilt and electromagnetic interference. But you can feel it, can't you? The difference between imagination and reality. This conversation, this moment. It has weight. It has consequences. The man turns in his chair, and for the first time, I see his face clearly. He's not anyone I recognize, but his eyes are familiar somehow. They're Sarah's eyes, the same shade of green, the same gentle intelligence. She wants you to know something, Marcus. The room around him begins to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The walls seem to breathe, expanding and contracting slightly. The photographs on the coffee table flutter without any wind. She wants you to know that the accident wasn't your fault. That the ice could have taken anyone. That loving someone means accepting that loss is possible, not avoiding love to prevent pain. Static begins to creep in from the edges of the screen, but the man's voice remains clear. She wants you to sleep, Marcus. She wants you to dream. She wants you to forgive yourself and find peace in the hours between midnight and dawn. The signal is degrading rapidly now, the image breaking apart into horizontal lines and random pixels. But I can still hear his voice, growing distant but still audible. The frequency is closing now. The skip is ending. But remember what you've seen here. Remember that signals can travel through time as well as space. Remember that love is its own kind of electromagnetic radiation, and it never truly stops broadcasting. The screen erupts into static, violent and chaotic. When it finally stabilizes, channel 47 is showing nothing but empty air, the soft gray noise of a frequency with nothing to transmit. I sit in the blue, white glow of the static for a long time, processing what just happened. Part of me wants to rationalize it away, to find logical explanations for everything I saw and heard. But another part of me, the part that still grieves Sarah after all these years, recognizes truth when it hears it. I turn off the television and walk to my bedroom. For the first time in 12 years, I feel tired, genuinely. naturally tired. As I lie down and close my eyes, I think about signals skipping across time, about love as a form of electromagnetic radiation that never stops broadcasting. And for the first time since the accident, I sleep without dreams of black ice and twisted metal. Instead, I dream of Sarah reading in our old apartment, bathed in warm yellow light from a brass lamp with a beaded chain pull, while in the background, barely audible, the soft whisper of voices carries messages of forgiveness across the years. Story 10. The old Grundig shortwave radio hisses and pops as I tune across the frequencies, searching for something to fill the empty hours between midnight and dawn. My name is Elena, and I'm a radio astronomer by day, spending my working hours listening to signals from distant galaxies. But at night, in my small apartment above the antique shop, I hunt for more terrestrial transmissions, the lonely voices of ham radio operators, distant AM stations bouncing off the ionosphere, the occasional number station broadcasting coded messages to agents who may or may not still exist. Tonight feels different, though. The atmospheric conditions are perfect for long-distance reception. High pressure, clear skies, minimal electromagnetic interference. My shortwave set, a 1960s German model that belonged to my grandfather, is performing flawlessly. The analog dials respond to my touch with mechanical precision, and the vacuum tubes glow warm amber in the darkness of my listening room. I settle into my leather chair, headphones adjusted comfortably over my ears, and begin the nightly ritual of frequency sweeping, starting at 3.0 megs. I slowly tune upward through the shortwave bands, pausing at each sign of activity. A cargo ship in the North Atlantic reports its position. A late night talk show from somewhere in the American Midwest discusses conspiracy theories about government mind control. 2 ham radio operators in Australia exchange technical details about antenna construction. Normal traffic, the usual suspects of the electromagnetic spectrum after midnight. But at 6.8047 megahertz, something catches my attention. It's not music, not voices in the conventional sense. It's whispering. Multiple voices speaking simultaneously in a language I can't identify, creating a susurrating chorus that rises and falls like wind through autumn leaves. The signal is strong and clear, with none of the fading or static that characterizes long-distance shortwave reception. I fine-tune the frequency until the signal locks in perfectly. The whispers become clearer, though no more comprehensible. There are definitely multiple speakers. I can distinguish at least 6 distinct voices, maybe more. They're speaking in unison sometimes, other times in counterpoint, creating complex harmonies of meaning that my ears can follow, but my mind cannot parse. The strange thing is how intimate it sounds. Despite being transmitted over radio waves, possibly from thousands of miles away, the whispers seem to be coming from right next to my ear. I can hear the subtle breath sounds, the soft clicks of tongues against teeth, the wet sounds of lips forming words in an unknown language. I check my signal strength meter. The needle is pinned at maximum, indicating a transmission source much closer than it should be for this frequency. Local broadcasters typically operate on different bands, and there are no licensed stations in my area that transmit on 6.847 megahertz. As I listen, trying to identify patterns in the whispering, I realize that the voices are telling stories. Not in any language I recognize, but the cadence, the rhythm, the emotional inflections. These are narrative voices. Someone is recounting events, describing experiences, sharing memories in hushed tones that suggest secrets being passed between trusted friends. I reach for my recording equipment, an old cassette deck that I use to capture interesting transmissions for later analysis. But as soon as my finger touches the record button, the whispers stop. Silence fills the frequency, not even carrier wave hiss. Complete electromagnetic quiet, as if the transmission has been cut off at its source. I wait, headphones pressed against my ears, straining to hear any return of the signal. Minutes pass. Then, just as I'm about to move on to another frequency, the whispers resume. This time, they're different. Still multiple voices. Still that unknown language. But now there's urgency in the tone. The speakers are talking faster, overlapping each other more frequently, creating a cascade of sibilant sounds that wash over me like waves breaking on a distant shore. And underneath the whispers, I begin to hear something else. A rhythmic sound, barely perceptible at first, but growing clearer as I adjust the audio filters. It's footsteps, someone walking on a hard surface, concrete maybe, or stone. The steps are measured, deliberate, echoing slightly as if in a large empty space. The footsteps grow louder while the whispers continue, creating a layered soundscape that feels more like a field recording than a radio transmission. I can hear the walkers breathing now, slightly labored, as if they're carrying something heavy or climbing a long staircase. Then, clear as if spoken directly into my ear, a single word emerges from the whispers. Elena. My blood chills. The whispers haven't changed language. They're still speaking in that unidentifiable tongue. But my name floats above them like a ship on dark water, perfectly articulated and unmistakably directed at me. I lean back in my chair, suddenly aware of how isolated I am in my third-floor apartment. How the old building creaks and settles around me in the small hours of the morning. Through my windows, the street below is empty, lit only by a few sodium vapor lamps that cast orange circles of light in the darkness. The whispers continue, and now I'm certain they're talking about me. Not to me, but about me, discussing me in that urgent, secretive tone. I catch fragments that sound almost familiar. Syllables that might be corrupted versions of words I know. Phonemes that dance on the edge of recognition without ever resolving into meaning. Elena, the clear voice says again. And this time it's followed by what sounds like my address. Numbers and street names rendered in that same crystal clarity, while the surrounding whispers maintain their linguistic opacity. This isn't possible. Radio transmissions don't work this way. You can't have a signal that's partially intelligible to one specific listener while remaining cryptic to others. Electromagnetic radiation doesn't discriminate between receivers. But as I listen, more familiar words begin to emerge from the whisper stream. My occupation, radio astronomer. The name of the university where I work, Meridian State. Details about my research into pulsar emissions and extraterrestrial intelligence. Information that isn't publicly available. Information that exists only in my personnel files and research proposals. The footsteps are growing closer now, echoing up what sounds like a concrete stairwell. The walker has reached a landing. I can hear keys jingling, a door being unlocked. The creak of hinges. Then footsteps across what might be a wooden floor, moving through what sounds like the layout of my own apartment. I pull off my headphones and listen to my actual surroundings. The building is quiet except for the usual settling sounds. Mrs. Chen's television murmurs softly through the walls. The refrigerator in my kitchen cycles on with its familiar hum. No footsteps, no doors opening or closing. I put the headphones back on. The walker has stopped moving, but I can still hear breathing, very close to whatever microphone is capturing this impossible transmission. The whispers continue around this central presence, discussing, debating, sharing information in their urgent undertones. Then the clear voice speaks again, and this time it says something that makes me question my sanity. She's listening to us right now. She can hear us through the radio. The whispers stop immediately, cutting off mid-syllable. In the silence that follows, I can hear only the breathing of the unseen walker, now slow and deliberate, like someone trying to remain very quiet. Elena, the voice says again, softer now, almost conversational. You're probably wondering who we are. You're probably thinking this is some kind of hoax, some elaborate prank involving sophisticated radio equipment. I want to respond, but of course, I can't. This is a one-way transmission. I'm just a receiver, a passive listener to whatever this is. We're not pranking you, Elena. We're not even broadcasting in your sense of the word. What you're hearing is spillover, bleed, through from conversations happening in spaces adjacent to your reality. The whispers resume, quieter now, like a crowd that's been told to lower their voices. The breathing continues, and I realize that the walker is still there, still listening, still aware of my presence on the other end of this impossible connection. Your work with radio astronomy has made you sensitive to signals that exist outside the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Signals that carry information through dimensions rather than through space. The equipment you use to listen for extraterrestrial intelligence, it's also capable of detecting terrestrial intelligence that exists outside conventional space-time. This is impossible. But the voice is so calm, so reasonable, so matter of fact in its impossibility that I find myself accepting the explanation, even as my rational mind rejects it. The whispers you're hearing are the voices of people like you, Elena. People who became too sensitive to the spaces between spaces. People who listen too long and too carefully to signals from beyond the normal bounds of reality. The footsteps resume. But now they're moving away from the microphone, growing fainter. The whispers seem to be following the walker, their intensity decreasing as the group moves through whatever space they occupy. We gather here in the deep hours of the night, in the frequencies that exist between the official channels. We share what we've learned about the nature of reality, about the thin places where different dimensions touch. We tell stories of our lives before we understood what we were hearing. And we prepare for others like you who will inevitably find their way to our frequency. The signal is growing weaker now, as if the transmission source is moving away from whatever impossible antenna is carrying these voices across the dimensional barrier. You have a choice to make, Elena. You can dismiss this as hallucination, as the product of too many late nights spent listening to cosmic background radiation. You can return to your normal frequencies, your familiar voices, your safe distance from the mystery. The whispers are barely audible now, like conversations in the next room heard through thin walls. or you can keep listening. You can tune to this frequency again tomorrow night, and the night after that. You can learn the language of the spaces between spaces, join our conversations about the nature of reality, add your voice to our chorus of understanding. The last clear words fade into static, leaving only the faintest suggestion of whispers beneath the electromagnetic noise. I sit in my chair for a long time, headphones still on, wondering if what I heard was real, or just the product of too many years spent listening to the lonely voices of the night. But as dawn approaches, and I finally prepare for sleep, I realize that the choice has already been made. Tomorrow night, at exactly the same time, I'll be back in this chair with the old Grundig radio tuned to 6.847 ambience, listening for whispers from the spaces between spaces. Because some questions, once asked, demand answers, and some frequencies, once discovered, can never be truly forgotten. As I turn off the radio and remove my headphones, I could swear I hear one last whisper, so faint it might be imagination. Welcome to the deep night frequency, Elena. We'll be waiting for you. Story 11. The cassette tape sits on my desk like a small rectangular accusation, its yellowed label bearing my name in handwriting I don't recognize. I found it this morning in a box of estate sale items I purchased from the Henley house. The Victorian on Maple Street that's been empty for 3 years since old Mrs. Henley passed away. My name is David, and I restore vintage electronics for a living. I was hoping to find some interesting radio equipment in the sale, but instead I came home with boxes of random personal effects and this tape that shouldn't exist. The handwriting on the label is precise, old-fashioned, the kind of penmanship they taught in schools decades ago. It simply says, "For David," in blue ink that's faded but still legible. Underneath, in smaller letters, "Play when alone." I've been staring at it for an hour now, turning it over in my hands, examining every detail. It's a standard TDK 60 cassette, the kind that was popular in the 1980s. The plastic case is slightly warped from age, and there's a small crack in the corner that's been repaired with clear tape. Someone took care of this recording, preserved it, labeled it specifically for me. But that's impossible. I never knew Mrs. Henley personally. I'd seen her around town, a quiet woman who kept to herself, but we'd never spoken. She was at least 80 when she died, which means she would have been making cassette recordings when I was still a child living 3 states away. There's no logical reason for a tape with my name on it to exist in her effects. My workshop is quiet, except for the gentle hum of vintage tube equipment warming up on the shelves around me. It's past midnight. I do my best work in the late hours when the world is still, and I can focus on the delicate process of bringing old electronics back to life. Tonight, though, I can't concentrate on anything except this tape. I have a fully restored Namaki cassette deck from 1985. One of the finest tape machines ever made. If there's audio on this cassette, the Nakamichi will reproduce it with perfect fidelity. But something about the tape fills me with unease. Maybe it's the way my name is written in that careful, unfamiliar script. Maybe it's the instruction to play it only when alone. Or maybe it's just the inherent eeriness of finding a personal message from someone I never met. I slide the cassette into the deck and press play. For the first 30 seconds, there's only tape hiss, the soft susurrus of magnetic particles moving past the playback head. Then, emerging from the background noise like a figure walking out of fog, comes a voice. "Hello, David." It's a woman's voice, elderly but strong, with a faint trace of an accent I can't quite place. The recording quality is excellent, suggesting professional equipment rather than a simple home cassette recorder. If you're listening to this, then the timeline has proceeded as expected. You found this tape among my belongings, and your curiosity, that wonderful, dangerous curiosity that drives your work with old machines, has compelled you to play it. The voice pauses, and I can hear the subtle ambient sound of a room, the barely perceptible echo that suggests space around the speaker, the soft background noise of a house settling into itself. My name is Eleanor Henley, though you knew me only as the old woman who lived in the Victorian house on Maple Street. What you didn't know, what no one in town knew, is that I spent my life studying temporal mechanics, the way time flows and bends around certain objects, certain people, certain moments of decision. I reach for the stop button, convinced this is some elaborate joke, but something in the woman's tone makes me hesitate. There's a weight to her words, a gravity that suggests truth rather than fiction. You're thinking this is impossible, David. You're thinking that a dead woman can't leave you a personalized message about events that haven't happened yet. But time isn't as linear as most people believe. Under certain conditions, with the right equipment, information can flow backward as well as forward. The recording continues with the soft, measured pace of someone who has thought carefully about every word. I've been watching you, David, though you never knew it. Watching as you moved to our town 6 months ago, set up your workshop, began your work restoring the electronic ghosts of decades past. I've been waiting for the right moment to make contact, and that moment is now. Or rather, it was 3 years ago when I made this recording, knowing that you would find it tonight. My hands are trembling slightly as I adjust the volume. The workshop around me suddenly feels different, as if I'm no longer alone in it. The shadows cast by my equipment seem deeper, more active. You have a gift, David. The same gift that led you to your work with vintage electronics. You can feel the history in objects, the accumulated time that clings to things that have been handled, used, loved. That's why you're drawn to old radios, old amplifiers, old cassette decks like the Nakamichi you're using to play this recording. She's right. I've never articulated it that way, but I've always felt something when working with vintage equipment. A sense of the people who owned these machines, the music they played, the voices they captured and reproduced across the years. But objects aren't the only things that accumulate temporal energy, David. Places do too, and so do people. Some individuals, through repeated exposure to the flow of time in non-linear ways, become temporally active. They begin to exist not just in the present moment, but in multiple moments simultaneously. The voice pauses, and I hear what sounds like pages turning, as if Eleanor is consulting notes while she speaks. I became temporally active 40 years ago, while conducting experiments with electromagnetic fields and consciousness. I learned to perceive time as a navigable dimension, like moving through a house with many rooms. From any given moment, I could observe the past and future with equal clarity. Static creeps into the recording for a moment, then clears. That's how I know about you, David. That's how I know you would move to this town, open your workshop, find this tape. But it's also how I know what's going to happen next. My mouth is dry. This is either the most elaborate hoax I've ever encountered, or I'm listening to something that challenges everything I understand about reality. In approximately 3 minutes, you're going to hear your name called. Not from this recording, from somewhere else in your workshop. You'll think it's coming from one of your radio receivers, picking up a stray transmission, but it won't be. It will be a temporal echo, a voice from another time trying to communicate across the years. I look around my workshop at the dozens of radios, amplifiers, and receivers scattered across my workbenches. None of them are currently powered, except for the essential equipment, but old tube electronics sometimes picks up signals even when supposedly off. Don't be afraid when you hear it, David. The voice is mine, but from a different point in my timeline. I'm calling to you from 1987, when I first discovered your future existence and realized the role you would play in what's to come. The recording quality shifts slightly, as if Eleanor has moved closer to the microphone. You see, David, your sensitivity to temporal energy isn't just a quirk that makes you good at restoring old electronics. It's a gift that can be developed, trained, refined. With the right guidance, you could learn to do what I learned to do, to move consciously through time, to exist in multiple moments simultaneously, to communicate across the years as easily as speaking across a room. As if summoned by her words, I hear my name called from somewhere behind me. David. The voice is faint but clear, coming from the direction of my workbench, where several old radios sit in various states of repair. I spin around in my chair, but there's no obvious source for the sound. The radios are all dark, their tubes cold. David. The voice comes again, stronger this time. Definitely Eleanor's voice, but younger, carrying across decades to reach me in this moment. On the cassette, Eleanor's recorded voice continues. You're hearing me now from 1987. I'm 27 years old in that timeline, just beginning to understand the implications of temporal consciousness. I'm reaching forward through the years to make contact with you, because you represent the next step in this research. David. The ghostly voice calls my name a third time, and now I can see a faint glow coming from one of the old Philco radios on the far workbench. Its dial lights are illuminated, despite being unplugged, and the speaker cone is vibrating gently. The equipment in your workshop, all those old radios and amplifiers you've restored, they're not just electronic devices anymore, David. Through your work, through your temporal sensitivity, you've transformed them into something else. They've become bridges across time, receivers capable of picking up signals from the past and future. I stand and walk toward the glowing Philco, drawn by a fascination stronger than my fear. The radio is from 1948, a wooden cathedral model that I restored last month. It shouldn't be operating without power, but the tubes are glowing warm amber, and I can hear the soft hiss of active circuitry. David. Eleanor's young voice emerges clearly from the Philco speaker now. Can you hear me? On the cassette, the older Eleanor continues. This is your invitation, David. Your invitation to step beyond linear time, to join a very small community of individuals who exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously. We gather across the decades to share knowledge, to understand the true nature of time and consciousness, to guide others like you who show the potential for temporal awareness. I reach toward the Philco's volume knob, and as my fingers touch the Bakelite control, I feel a shock that's not electrical, but temporal. A sudden awareness of the radio's entire history. I see the factory where it was assembled in 1948. The family who bought it new and gathered around it to listen to programs that exist now only in memory. The decades of service before it finally fell silent, and then my workshop where I brought it back to life. But I also see something else. The radio in Eleanor's house in 1987 somehow connected to this same signal, this same impossible conversation across time. Young Eleanor standing in a room full of experimental equipment, speaking into a microphone connected to devices that shouldn't be able to transmit across 40 years. The choice is yours, the older Eleanor says from the cassette. You can dismiss this as hallucination, as the product of too many late nights spent alone with vintage electronics. You can put this tape away and return to your normal life, restoring old radios without understanding their true potential. Or, the younger Eleanor's voice says from the Philco, you can accept the invitation. You can learn to navigate time as consciously as you navigate space. You can join us in the work of understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. The glow from the Philco is intensifying, and other radios around the workshop are beginning to respond. Tubes warming to life, dials illuminating, speakers crackling with activity. My entire collection is awakening, creating a network of temporal receivers spanning decades of electronic history. What do you say, David? Both versions of Eleanor ask simultaneously, their voices separated by 40 years, but unified in this impossible moment. Are you ready to step outside of linear time? The cassette reaches the end of side A with a soft click, leaving only the ghostly voices from my awakened radios filling the workshop. I look around at the glowing tubes, the illuminated dials, the speakers that vibrate with conversations from across the years. And despite my rational mind screaming that this is impossible, I find myself reaching for the microphone connected to my own recording equipment, preparing to add my voice to a conversation that spans decades, preparing to answer an invitation that was extended before I was born and will echo long after I'm gone. Yes, I whisper into the microphone, and my voice joins the temporal network, carried backward and forward through time by the loving restored electronics that surround me. I'm ready. In the background, barely audible beneath the chorus of ghostly transmissions, I hear applause. Dozens of voices separated by years and decades, welcoming me to a community that exists outside of time itself.